Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars, but now they're doing a podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Greg Srizavasti.
And I'm Matt Levitz.
And that is Matt Levitz, my better half, my more intelligent half, the person who knows everything.
I'm not going to argue with any of that.
And we are the co-hosts of Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars.
That's good. You almost forgot the name of our show.
And Matt and Greg used to interview movie stars.
That was much better.
Better.
It was smoother.
You know what's smoother than my horrible intro?
The Little Mermaid.
Yes. That is horrible. That's an actionable comment. That's an actionable comment.
I wasn't sure where you were going with that, so I just went for the transition.
Calling a new co-host. Horrible transition. Well, I can't get rid of you because you're the creator of the show, so I should shut my mouth now. But here's the thing, though. What we have for you, Matt, I want you to really set the template for the show because I think it's going to be a really special episode.
Well, just like our last two episodes, which were True Romance, this is another one where we had way too much content, way too many interviews. So we have split the show in two. So this is going to be a part one and a part two. Part one, we're going to have the directors, Ron Clements and John Musker, and they sat together. Then we're going to have Pat Carroll, who was the voice of Ursula. And then this is really special. We have Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, the songwriters. And the reason this is so special is Howard Ashman died while he was in the middle of writing songs for Aladdin. So I think this is the only junket he ever participated in. There are not a lot of interviews with him that exist, and this is one of them. After Ashman and Menken, we're going to have Jeffrey Katzenberg, and then Roy Disney, and then Ariel herself, Jodie Benson.
Wow. Well, you're more of a Disney historian, very passionate about animation as well.
I wouldn't say historian.
Well,
I'm a big fan.
You're a big fan of Disney. I am a middling fan. The Little Mermaid, though, what do you think that was a turning point as far as the history of animation? The way,
absolutely. Prior to The Little Mermaid, they were not at their best. You know, they were making films like The Fox and the Hound and The Black Cauldron and The Great Mouse Detective, which was a moderate hit. That one, I think, came right before this one. Mm-hmm. You know, they weren't terrible movies. Well, The Black Cauldron was a terrible movie. But, by and large, they were still, probably better than any other animation house out there. But they weren't classics by any stretch. And The Little Mermaid was really the one that turned everything around. And Howard Ashman was a huge part of that. I mean, those Ashman and Menken songs were just fantastic. And this was the first time that Disney had ever turned to Broadway to steal some of their songwriters. Ashman and Menken had written Little Shop of Horrors prior to this. And that was really what got them this gig because the songs in that were so good. And Howard Ashman was more than just the lyricist. He was involved in shaping the whole movie and bringing that Broadway sensibility to a Disney animated film, which nowadays we kind of take for granted because they've been doing it so much since then. But this was the first time. And it created this hybrid that hadn't really existed before, which is like half cartoon, half Broadway show.
Yeah.
And it just melded so perfectly well that it became the way that these things were done for so many movies after that. And even to this day, I mean, as recently as Frozen and Moana, they're still doing Broadway shows as animated movies, and we have Howard Ashman to thank for that.
And it's great. I can't wait for the listeners to get a hold of these, listen to these interviews, because it's really a big turning point in cinematic history.
Yep. Before we get to that, though, we want to do some junket talk.
Junket talk.
We won't stay too long on this because we know you want to get to The Little Mermaid, as do we. But, as per the format of the show, we want to give you guys a little bit of insight into what it is you're listening to and how this world worked. And so I thought that we would start this episode with some of our junket rules.
I think the biggest junket rule is, it's a simple, keep it simple, stupid rule. Keep your trap shut. Don't make any noise.
You mean like don't ask any questions? Just sit there in silence and just look at them?
Well, it's
because I don't think that's a very good rule.
That's not a very good rule.
I mean, I know you practiced it all the time, but I don't recommend it.
Maybe listeners don't do that rule. Yeah. But just the idea of being quiet while the talent is speaking is rule number one, in my opinion.
Yeah, for the radio room.
Yeah.
Not for print.
Right, not for print.
And if you're doing a one-on-one for TV, you're allowed to make noise because you're on camera. I mean, people know that you're there.
Yeah.
But for us, so many people who shared the table with us were using these interviews, taking them back to their offices and cutting them up and pretending that they were one-on-ones.
Yeah.
So if any of us made noise, then it ruined it because suddenly there's another person in the middle of their one-on-one. So we had to be really, really quiet when they were talking, which meant we couldn't laugh out loud, which was really, it wasn't just hard for us. A lot of times it was hard for them. And I'm thinking specifically about how many times we interviewed Robin Williams.
All right.
And he would say something absolutely hysterical. And, he came from stand-up comedy and he was used to making people laugh all the time. And so when he didn't get that energy from us, it threw him.
Yeah.
He would say something really funny and no one would laugh and it would break his stride. He would go, well, what happened? What did I do wrong? And we would have to reassure him, no, we found that hilarious. We promise. We just can't laugh out loud. And after a while, he got it and he kind of knew when he would come into the room, okay, you're the guys who can't laugh out loud. And he would just roll with it. But it would throw a lot of people. But yeah, that was an important rule that you can't talk over the answer. And where this dynamic got even more interesting was as we were trying not to cut off the last word of their answer, because then you would just kill the whole bite if you did that. You also wanted to get in as soon as that last word was said, because if you didn't, someone else was going to get in instead of you.
Yes.
There was this competition to ask questions.
You'd have to sometimes shout your question over someone else just to get in.
Yeah. There were a lot of times where 2 or 3 people were trying to get in and get their question. And more often than not, I think the people who were sitting closer to the person would be the winner.
Right. Earshot.
Or sometimes it would just be whoever the person was looking at. Like everyone else would back off. But there was definitely this competition to get questions in. And sometimes it got ugly. Sometimes there were shouting matches. But it was based on you couldn't go too early because then you would cut off the last word of the answer. But you also couldn't go too late because then you lost. Someone else was there.
Yeah.
So it took a while to really learn that timing and how to get in and how to shout the other person down if necessary. And it was difficult. It could be very stressful.
By the way, that being stressful, whenever they put me, I don't know if you've had this, I'm sure you've had this experience, whenever they put me at a print table, since then, so easy for me to get questions because you just know the timing and you just go right, and everyone at the print tables, they're just kicking back, right? And usually radio people would dominate print tables as far as
right, because we've been through drill camp.
Yeah.
We're the group who knows, half a second after that last word is spoken, you're there.
Yeah.
And you're asking your question and there's just no wiggle room at all. And you have to get good at that or you won't survive.
Yeah.
So that was definitely something that it was hard to learn.
Yeah, I eventually got used to it. But then like you were saying in a previous episode that there's some days you realize that the fight wasn't worth it. You're just going to kick back and relax and let everyone else go to town on the questions.
That happened a lot, definitely. I mean, there are junkets that I was at where I never opened my mouth once. And it wasn't because I didn't have questions to ask. I would either be losing those battles or I just didn't want to have them. The other thing I wanted to bring up about this, we're not going to name names whenever we say anything negative about a colleague. We're not going to name them. But there was one person who had a strategy that I know, Greg, you and I really were not a big fan of. And this person would ask multi-part questions.
Right.
So this person, I'm going to try to remain genderless, would get in there, would win the battle, and then would say, okay, so there's 3 things I want to know. And then would ask 3 questions that were not part of the same question. They were 3 separate things, 3 separate subjects.
Yeah.
I won the battle, the floor is mine, and now I'm going to dominate.
Yep.
And it always felt like cheating.
Looking back, I'm going to say I felt that maybe that was cheating, and at the time I was frustrated with that line of questioning, but the radio tables they no longer exist. I ended up liking a lot of those questions, so I'm a bit neutral with that. But I get what you're saying. It
was frustrating at the
time. At the time.
Then there was another person who would mark their territory, again, staying genderless, by giving a sharp intake of breath. Do you remember this, Greg?
I don't remember.
Okay. So you probably will once I describe it.
Okay.
Right as the interviewee was coming to the end of a sentence, at the end of their bite, and we all knew, okay, this is the last part, over the last couple of words you would hear this intake of breath, which was marking territory. And instinctively, you would back off. Because when somebody does that in a conversation, you know, okay, they're about to talk. And so something in your mind would just go, let them talk. And this person was able to ask so many more questions because they did that. They learned this little trick. And I would fight it sometimes because I kind of resented that they did it all the time. And so I would hear the sharp intake of breath, and I would ask a question anyway and would get the dirtiest look.
That's amazing that you say that, Matt. I sort of remember that, but I guess I wasn't as attuned to that as you were because, to be fair, during the 90s, you really asked a lot of questions, and I was mainly... I did ask my share of questions in the 90s,
You
but
did.
I was more of a get my one or two esoteric questions in. But no, I do remember, I vaguely recall that.
Yeah, I guess
like
you weren't in the battleground
The
so
scrum,
much.
right.
Yeah, when things would get ugly, you'd kind of back off. And I would a lot too, actually.
Me being a coward and all.
I don't think that's true at all.
No, but these were all tactics to get these interview questions in.
Yes. And they were all valid and they were all fair.
From your recollection, were a lot of these questions value added, meaning they were good questions anyway?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think everyone in the room, whatever you thought of them personally, they all were good at their jobs. But there were a lot of people there, and some people would never get their questions in, and there were other people who were really forceful. And, yes, I've asked 6 questions already, but darn it, I'm going to ask a 7th. And I don't care that these 3 people haven't even gotten one in.
Yeah.
And there was definitely that aggressiveness in that room. And, when you listen to these tapes, I think you'll hear some of that.
Yeah. And you'll hear, most importantly, some really good stories. That's the most important part.
Well,
at
the end of the day, we all went home with those tapes, and we could all use any part of it.
Yeah. And
so it didn't really matter whether you asked the question or someone else asked the question. If the answer was good, then you used it.
We got good tape. It's all about getting good tape.
Yeah. It was really just about when you're there, when you've gone to the trouble to see the movie, and then you're sitting there in that room, you want to participate. You want to be part of it. But technically, you didn't have to. You could just hit record and sit there quietly.
Yep.
And it was all the same. You would still go back with tape. But for me, at least, I wanted to participate. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to connect with the talent and be a part of it and influence things. And also in a positive way. I mean, I wanted to ask questions that other people maybe couldn't think of or hadn't thought of, or maybe I did a little more research than someone else did. And I could bring the conversation there, and other people would appreciate it. I would have people say to me sometimes, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't even know that. And that's great. And I'm going to go back and use that. And, that's valuable to me. And that made me feel good that I had brought that to the room.
Yeah. But you had to work up to get that question in because of all the struggles.
Yeah. And there were other times where I knew I had a great question and I couldn't get it in because I just kept getting shouted down.
Yeah.
And that was frustrating.
Well, on the flip side, I knew I never had a good question to ask, so I just shut up.
Well, that works out pretty well for you, I think. And it worked out even better for us.
Well, what works out really well, though, is who are we leading off with, Matt, with The Little Mermaid?
Well, we're leading off with the directors, and I do want to say that this junket was in Orlando, and I wasn't there. This is before my time.
This was before my time. My time started in 1991. Your time started in 1992.
So, yeah, this was a few years prior to that. This was 1989. November 4th, 1989. So this is in Orlando. It was in a ballroom, which is unusual. Normally, they did these junkets in individual rooms so that there was no sound carryover, for the sound quality. We each had our own room. You would close the door, and there would be no bleed over. But every now and then, they would put everyone into a ballroom, and the sound quality was awful.
Yep.
And this is one of those. So you're going to hear a lot of noise. You're going to hear the other tables. It sounds like they're in the middle of a restaurant.
Yep.
And we apologize for that, but it is what it is, and this is what exists. So, we either live with it or we don't play these tapes, and the tapes are great, so we're living with it. So these are the directors, Ron Clements and John Musker. And let me see, I'm looking at my notes. So the very first guy you'll hear asks a 2-part question.
Oh,
So
nice.
we were just talking about this, how we feel like that's cheating. But you're going to hear it right off the bat. This guy just staking his claim, saying this is my interview. And definitely a pet peeve of mine. It I was listening to this tape and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And dude, you're breaking the rules. Stop it.
Well, folks,
Shouting at him back through time.
any other extra things for Ron Clements and John Musker before we get to the filmmakers?
Yeah, there's a beep in there to indicate a tape change edit. We talked about this a little bit in the last interview,
Right.
but I just want to point it out. This is a limitation of cassette tapes. Sometimes they would stop in the middle of an interview and you had to flip the tape over and hit record and you'd wind up missing 10 or 15 seconds. And we've got another one of these here. So apologies, but that's what we've got.
Well, the opening interview rubbed Matt the wrong way. Hopefully,
Not the whole interview, just the first question.
Just the first question. Hopefully, the first question.
But it's a good interview.
But it's a great interview, and this will rub you the right way. Ron Clements and John Musker interview.
Not even going to touch that. Sure. Enjoy.
Here we go.
Everyone, this is Ron Clements and John Musker, the co-directors, co-writers, and producer.
Sort of quasi.
How are you doing on this?
I'm doing fine. Sure. I don't know if I'll make all the way around the thing,
All right,
but
well, I'll keep my eye. That looks like nobody's touched it.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you introduce yourselves again for the radio?
Yeah, I'm John Musker. I'm co-writer, co-director, and co-producer.
And I'm Ron Clements. I'm co-writer, co-director, and was not a co-producer.
Well, have we got questions for you?
Yeah, you got a lot of explaining to do. Let me
Okay.
tell you right from the get-go.
What I'd like to find out from you guys, and briefly here so that other people get to ask some questions too, is a little bit of the history of the Little Mermaid. It seems as if this whole deal really came from your guys' heads. I mean, you were the ones that in 1984, according to the interviews we've done already, said, "Yo, the Little Mermaid, let's do it." What I'd like to get from you is a thumbnail sketch, number one, on just the whole process of making this film from that day to this day, number one, and number two, to find out specifically what you feel technically makes this film unique. We've heard a lot about one animating director being signed to one character, but I really don't understand why that makes this film technically special. If you give us a thumbnail history first.
I mean, the history of the project, it actually began very close to the time that the new regime came over to Disney, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. What they did, they got a lot of the sort of supposedly creative people in the department together, and I guess this is something they've done at other studios, and just wanted to have a pitch session. So everyone was supposed to go out and get 5 ideas, their 5 best ideas, and then everyone was sitting around a table to pitch their ideas. I had gone out, went into a bookstore, and just picked up a collection of fairy tales, and was looking and came across The Little Mermaid, the Hans Christian Andersen story. And before that, in the back of my mind, I just thought that an underwater fantasy would be a fun thing to do in animation, because there's underwater sequences in other films, but there hadn't been a whole movie that really sort of centered on that. So I thought, I wonder why this has never been done. This is a great story. And then you read the story, and it's a wonderfully visual story. It's also one of the saddest stories ever written, which would make it a little bit difficult to handle. And then, so within that, I wrote like a 2-page treatment of a way of doing it that wasn't so sad, and submitted that, and they liked the treatment, and then wanted to pursue it. And then basically you go into development. John and I had both been directing on a film called The Great Mouse Detective at that point. We were about halfway through that, and as Mermaid started to get going, then we worked as a team on that, and then we worked on a team. We actually proposed, let us write the script. They'd been considering maybe having a live action writer come in, and so they let us have a shot at writing the script, and we started with, then we expanded to a 20-page treatment.
In the process, at this point in the process, Howard Ashman was involved in terms of spotting songs when it was just in the treatment phase, and it basically went from a treatment where we discussed with Howard where the songs might go, and they started conceiving the songs. Then we went and wrote a script without any songs, just the movie songless. Then Howard and Alan were working on composing the songs, and then we folded those into a new draft of the script with revisions, and basically went through about 4 drafts of the script, and then we started storyboarding the movie, and this was back in 87. This was, mid-year 87. So we started casting and storyboarding at that point, and Howard was heavily involved in the casting, and once we had the whole film storyboard, it took about 6 months to do that. We recorded the whole script. We had cast the film by that point and recorded the songs, and then we basically put it all up. At that point, it was about 90 minutes long, and then we proceeded to sort of make trims in it, make adjustments and things like that, and it sort of went into production at that point, like around early '88, as far as going into animation, and it goes through rough animation and cleanup animation and effects animation, and then you Xerox it and you put it in color, and it's all done sort of like a jigsaw puzzle where one scene may be working its way through the system while something else is still in an earlier phase of production. And like this quilt, you just sort of build the movie, and eventually, this past few months we've been doing the mixing and the scoring and that sort of thing. Those are sort of the last things in the process.
Okay, so of this particular story, we have a number of elements that tend to make this unique, at least according to Disney. And tell me if I'm off the mark, and maybe perhaps you can explain this. Number one, you guys decide, hey, we're going to write a script. Okay, according to everything we've heard, writing a script for an animated film is completely unique.
It's unusual for Disney. Most of the scripts have been developed coming in from a live-action background. Felt like this was kind of nutty, and that you really ought to have a script to know more where you're headed on the story and to flesh it out so they can see it.
They're not. I think it doesn't become a go project until a script is okay. So a script almost had to be done because nothing. You can't say we're actually going to make this movie until you have a script and say, yeah, this is a movie worth making. I think the problem in the past, that the reluctance to write a script is the idea that a live-action writer, not having worked in animation, might have trouble writing for the medium of animation, that it may be too dialogue-heavy, not visual enough, not enough situations that can work in animation. In our case, we came from an animation background. We were both animators and we were storymen doing story sketches and storyboards, so we were more familiar with the medium, and we'd done some writing outside of that, but I think that helped us in terms of writing a script that maybe worked a little better in terms of the animation process.
So never before in the history of Disney animation have we had as full a script as we have.
I think there was one.
Probably true.
I think 101 Dalmatians, there was a script of sorts done by Bill Pete, one of the storymen, but I think, this is very atypical of the whole Disney.
Do you have the feeling they're going to continue this way now?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they've discovered a little bit, like on their subsequent films, that it's a little problematic when they do have these live-action writers writing who don't have a background in animations. Then when they go to storyboard what the live-action guys have written, it can be kind of dry and not work so well in animation. It can feel a little more sort of continuity-oriented and not work as well in the medium. So I think they may try and develop more in-house people that come out of animation who also do writing. I think they'll tend to be more successful for animation with people with that background.
So what it means is that you have to be in command of both your visual art as well as your literal art.
Right.
And that was what it took. It took somebody with a marriage of those talents.
Right. I think that really did make a difference.
Just a couple other things. This seemed to be put together real quickly. We're hearing about all these things, but by the time you started drawing and doing, the drawing for the film, it seems as if we're talking only, 15 months?
Yeah, actually the animation was about a year, maybe a little bit over a year, which is really quick now. If you look at the credits, we had 40 animators on this film. We're used to working on films with about 20 animators, so really, in a sense, we kind of doubled the size of the staff, which made us kind of spin around like tops, trying to keep everybody in work, because anybody's sitting there not drawing, the cash register is still ringing, and we have people saying, let's go, we need to keep everybody busy, and so it was difficult for us just to logistically, and we had Maureen Donnelly, who's sitting at the table over there, who's our production manager and associate producer, who was helping, keep, we had guidelines every week, we want to get so many feet of animation done and so many feet of cleanup, and we could see how close we were to those guidelines. But yes, it was a real concentrated period, more than we're used to working, which was good and bad. Good in the stimulus it gave you, because in the old regime it was a little bit too lethargic, I'd say.
I think it was good for the film and bad for
bad for our.
If
We saw our family less and less as the time went on. I have kids that I'm barely.
And there was a period
Dad,
where we were
they don't
working,
recognize
basically working weekends, working huge days, and still behind. This feeling of being constantly behind to where you should be and trying to catch up. And it was very difficult.
What they're doing to try and alleviate that is they're trying to get two separate units producing films so they can still release them every year, but they're longer production schedules so that they have 18 months to do what we did in a year, so that hopefully they can do that with, less strain. Basically.
In the old days, though, 12 months for this sort of film would be completely unheard of.
Right, it would be,
what
absolutely.
What are we talking comparatively?
My sense of it is that at least double that, and maybe more so. Snow White was released in 1937, but it was begun at least, even in terms of the animation, they spent at least 2 years on the animation on that.
A couple other things here. Number one, what's the budget on this?
It's we don't know exactly. We try not to look at the numbers. It's about your budget of your decently budgeted live action film. It's expensive by animation.
15 million.
25?
No, it's
less than 20.
Less than 25, but
And
more than
over
12.
15.
Okay.
Somewhere in there.
So around 20?
I'm sure we're not supposed to say, so we won't say. But
Mr. Katzenberg will tell us.
yeah, see, ask him and see what
get
he
it from
says,
him.
and take his figure.
Finally, the New York stage elements of this particular film seem to make it unique from any other Disney fairy tale movie. Tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Howard was involved early on in the process. I think Little Shop of Horrors drew him to the eyes of the studio management. And actually, we were sort of combined with Howard. It was sort of like they said, we had suggested the idea, and I think they were trying to woo Howard to come to the studio, and they said, these are projects we have in development. Howard said, well, Little Mermaid is great. I'd love to work on that. Howard had done a play, I think, called Anders Songs, where he did all these different fairy tales, Anderson fairy tales. So he was interested in it right from the start. So they sort of put us together with Howard, and
we flew to New York and
met with Howard there.
And it was, and Howard, I think, is really what brought that to it. Howard's very interested in animation, really excited about animation, but he'd never worked in it before, and it excited us because he was so excited about it, and he brought something I think that was totally wouldn't have been there if he hadn't gotten involved. One of his first things, we had like this 20-page treatment, and in our treatment we had the crab character that was I think we did have him. He was musical. He conducted the orchestra. He looked after the mermaid. He was kind of a curmudgeon type, and then Howard's first thing when he read a thing, he wanted to make the crab Jamaican, and he wanted to give him these calypso songs. And for us, it was kind of a slight, because we had conceived it a little differently. Jamaican, gee, but he's this dignified guy. And then as we thought about it, the more we thought about it, we realized that would make the character, that would make him much more interesting than what we had, and also it would make the music much more interesting. So it was things like that. And then in terms of the casting, I know Howard, in terms of casting people who had more of a theatrical background and who did these types of songs, which are not typical type songs because they're acting performance type songs, that he was real principally involved with going for that casting in New York and finding those people. And we casting was very difficult. We listened to a lot of people to find.
We had auditions both in LA and New York, and we discovered that in LA we had a hard time finding singer actors or actors who could sing because so much of TV work and film work and not musical stage work, which this was really aimed at completely. So then we started having auditions in New York, and we actually cast the Mermaid. Howard had his casting person in New York sending us tapes, so we had about 40 tapes of these different girl singers. So we cast Jodie, who did the Mermaid, never having seen Jodie. We only heard her voice, which even, as we were listening to the actors record the voices, I never look at them anyway. I'm sitting there just like listening like this because I, having come from an animation background, I know the animator's problem when he gets that voice is just, all you've got is the voice there. You can't look at anything. You just got to create this performance, and you hope that the voice has enough of the performance in it that inspires you. So
you look for a voice that when you hear the voice, you can see the animation, and that's unique. There's some very good actors that don't have that particular quality.
Whose voice is the crab?
Sam Wright is his name, Wright, and he was in the Tap Dance Kid on Broadway, and more recently he played Dizzy Gillespie in Clint Eastwood's movie Bird. He basically comes from a New York stage thing. Right now he's touring in a play, and he was a great inspiration inspiration to us. We videotaped him when he was doing the songs. He's actually a tall, he's 6'2" and a spindly guy actually, but he has a very low voice, and we actually had him sort of dance the song. We videotaped him for the animators to study, which was a lot of fun because he, being a stage performer, he really did a lot of great expressive things with his face and his body that then we tried to get into the animation. It's sort of a cliche of animation that you do that, but we did actually get that.
Is that he's traveling?
He's actually traveling in Phantom of the Opera, but the non-musical one, I think. There's this other Phantom of the Opera that's on tour right now, which I haven't seen. He's in that, and I have no idea what he plays in that.
Well, we darn.
Yeah, he was also in. He's in I'm Not Rappaport. Also, he toured in I'm Not Rappaport, and he's been in any number of musical theater plays.
I think that was a stroke of genius. I mean, that character is very lively and very likable, and very, you come away from the movie having a very strong impression of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that
really
goes to Sam and to Howard.
We sort of, the Crab, we knew in a certain way would need to carry the movie, and he worked in just the way that I think we wanted him to.
Yeah.
He was like surprisingly different.
Yeah. I know he's sort of like the Jiminy Cricket of the movie, and yet we didn't want to do something that was too cloying or sweet or something, and something that had a little edge to it, and it was funny and entertaining. And I think Howard's take on the sort of reggae calypso numbers and all that gave him an edge that was just quirky and fun and really made him come to life in a way that,
How much decision and talking is it about going completely directly from the book and having a sad ending, or how you're going to make a happy ending?
It wasn't really something that we ever considered to go with the book. Right from the very start, we felt that to make it work for what we wanted to do, that we wanted to give it a happy ending, but we didn't want to make the happy ending just something that is imposed on the story. So we tried to conceive the themes that we were going for in such a way that the ending would feel satisfying and feel like it was the ending that should be there. And that was mainly came out of the relationship between the father and daughter, and the element, the theme of a father kind of giving up his daughter and deciding that what she wants is okay, even though what he wants for her is something different. And
we felt that had a bittersweet quality to it that was not foreign to Anderson, and we felt maybe twisting it slightly in our own minds that we were keeping some of Anderson's poignancy by having an ending that wasn't totally just everything's happy, but there was an element of separation and partying and a sacrifice. I mean, really, that's the heart of Anderson's story, is sacrifice. I mean, she does give up her voice in the Anderson story. She does ultimately, her sisters or whoever wants her they want her to kill the prince. She won't do it, and she sort of loses the deal in the story and dies kind of in essence. And Anderson himself tried to put sort of a nice cast on it, saying she'd get an immortal soul after so many years, to put some slight, up on the end of his story. But at heart, I mean, I think Anderson is a melancholy writer.
Little Mermaid is a beautiful story. It's a great story, but from a film standpoint, it's structured that in that it starts out sad, and then it gets sadder, and it gets sadder, and it gets sadder, and then she dies in the end. There really aren't any real ups about it.
I think that's the reason why they haven't touched it until now.
It could very possibly be. I mean, that may be why it's been sitting on the shelf for so long, and we consciously wanted to give it something that had more emotional, peaks and then valleys and other peaks, and so and not necessarily.
The other big thing that we did was to make the witch more of a villain. I mean, which she really isn't in the Anderson story. She makes the deal, lets her become human, and then she's out of the story. And by propelling the witch into more of a villain role, automatically makes it a little more plot oriented than what the Anderson story was. But once again, in terms of the Disney thing and what we were conceiving, we felt that was really important to do.
What's some of the future projects that you may be involved in?
We're not totally sure at this point. We've got a few things that we want to pitch them, and they've got a few ideas they're pitching us. And
we just finished this movie Wednesday.
Have
your children seen it?
No, they haven't. Actually, they've seen little bits and pieces of it when they've come by the studio on the Moviola. When I'm working, I'm like, here's this part and here's that part. So I'll take them to a theater and they'll see it. I hope they like it. I don't know. I'll get their review.
What were you doing Wednesday? I mean,
we were looking at an answer print, basically. They were just finishing the reel by reel. This is on 5 reels, and the color was done, I don't know, maybe like 3 weeks ago, but they're just printing. They have to time all all the scenes individually, get the color timing right. Literally, the mix of the film was done maybe 2 weeks ago or something like that, if that, where all the sound effects, music, and
we okayed the mix just about a week.
yeah, we okayed the mix about a week ago. Basically, we had a preview just to check and make sure it was all the way we wanted
When's
it.
this opening?
It opens in a few cities on the 15th, but nationwide on the 17th of November.
Right up against.
Yeah. Same day
Right
as
up
All Dogs
against,
Go to
yeah,
Heaven,
that
if
happened
anybody's
last
seen
year,
that,
too.
which we haven't seen yet, but
I saw it.
don't worry.
It's cute. I liked it.
Yeah, we haven't seen it. We'll go see it, but I'll go see it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye.
All right, so those were the directors of The Little Mermaid, Ron Clements and John Musker. Just so you know, this is a pair. They work together all the time. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen one of their names without the other. At the time, they didn't know what their next movie was going to be, as you heard. It turned out to be Aladdin 3 years later. And then subsequently, they continued working together, and they made Hercules, Treasure Planet, The Princess and the Frog, and Moana.
I love Treasure Planet and, of course, Moana.
They're all great.
They're all great. They're all Treasure Planet, very, very underrated.
Yeah.
This is just an obvious thing, but from the interview, the thing I really loved about it was how hard they worked. The idea, this is a predictable idea, but the fact that they would take time, they would basically spend their entire weekends working on the movie. That's to be expected with The Little Mermaid, but they said that even after working through the weekends and having no days off during production, they still felt they were behind in the making of the movie. I guess that's how it is with every animated film, right?
Of course, maybe they were.
Of course, maybe maybe
We
they
don't
were.
know.
We don't know, but the results are there. So
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the things I love about the animation art form is that everything is made. You know, with a live action film, you go to a location, you get out your camera, you put your actors there, and you point and you shoot, and you know, you don't have to create this stuff. If you're shooting in front of an ocean, then the waves are happening naturally. You don't have to make those waves. With animation, you're making everything. And I just love the art form. I love watching the film and seeing the amount of work that went into it. I'm in such awe of the artists and these geniuses making these masterpieces, even when the movie itself doesn't work. And, you know, sometimes it doesn't. Not everything that Disney has done is a masterpiece. But even in the ones that sort of fall a little bit short, you know, with the story, there's always so much artistry to it. In the backgrounds, in the characters, I mean, in everything that you can't help but admire. You know, even if you walk away going, that wasn't the greatest, there's still so much great work. There's just so much to enjoy. And I mean, you can freeze frame on any frame, and I mean, it's like a painting.
yeah,
You know, and you can see how much went into that. And then you get into the artistry of the animators making the characters move and how they stay on model even when they turn their heads, and how they make it look like the characters have weight. And then they use squash and stretch to give it this bounciness. I mean, the level of talent that goes into this stuff is unreal. I just have so much respect for the guys who do it.
yeah.
So anyways, our next interview is with one of the voice actors.
Pat Carroll.
Exactly.
Right. And
The voice of the villain, Ursula.
And little tidbit, this is not a spoiler, that fact that at the time of making The Little Mermaid, she was either 61, 62, and she was saying during the interview that she hadn't worked this hard in years.
Right.
So it's really cool to see her at that age, at that point, still doing great work and working really hard for something worthwhile.
You know, I think that Ursula has sort of become her calling card. I mean, she's had a very long and storied career, but this, I mean, more people, I think, have heard her doing Ursula in this movie than have seen anything else she's done. But she's done a lot of classic stuff. I mean, if you look at IMDb, her first credit is 1948.
Wow.
I mean, she's been at it for a while. And then you start seeing credits like Caesar's Hour. She was Bunny Halper on Make Room for Daddy from 1961 to 1964.
The Red Skelton Hour she was on for intermittently over the years.
For eight years. She was on Too Close for Comfort in the late 80s.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, she's been around, but I think that her iconic role is definitely this one, Ursula the Sea Witch. Let's see, what I'm looking at my notes now. She starts off with small talk before anyone asks a question. And this is the kind of stuff that normally no one would ever hear, you know, because you would pull a soundbite, you would go to where it's the interesting stuff, the good stories. One of the things I wanted to do with this show is to give you that small talk too. They would come in, and before they sat down, before anyone even asked a question, they would just start talking, and then it would sort of transition into, okay, well, now let's do the interview. And I wanted to leave that stuff in because that's part of the experience. That's part of what we went through, and that's part of what we want to convey in this show and to give you guys this you are there feel. And so we wanted to leave that in. The other thing I wanted to say, I love that every time she laughs, it's Ursula's laugh. So listen for that. I mean, you hear that cackle, and it's so iconic with that character, and the fact that that's her real laugh, I think, is just charming.
Nice, yeah.
So anyway, here she is, Pat Carroll.
Pat
Enjoy.
Carroll.
I keep waiting to read it.
Belinda, how are you? Pat Carroll, good seeing you. And we drove through Long Beach, and there were Red Cross tents up. And I said to Mom, a bright kid at 5, Mom, why are these Red Cross tents up? And she said, well, there's been an earthquake, darling, and these people have to... Do you know, I was petrified ever since that if we had an earthquake, I'd have to live in a tent. I didn't want to do it. I've been petrified of earthquakes ever since.
They lost all their homes, all their belongings.
Is that
everything. They're
heartbreaking?
homeless.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you, I'm so sentimental the night of the next series game that was on, when those 62,000 people sang San Francisco. My God, the tears started coming down. I said, where's Spencer and Clark and Jeanette now that we need them? But I was really very
say
touched.
nothing of Charles Pierce.
Oh, please. And also the moment of silence for those who were killed was very necessary. But, oh, my God, I lived in agony for 3 days fretting about it.
Yeah.
Well, let's get on a lighter note.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's talk about the Little Mermaid.
You see, you had to show up from San Francisco, for
Maybe
God's sake.
before we get into specific questions, you could just say when you got into the project, how long ago it was, and at what stage of development.
2
Ursula
years
was.
ago, I auditioned for the Disney studio. Let me up front say that they are among the most professional. The last time I had this kind of professional treatment was on the old Carroll Burnett show. Sent to the house was a total script of the entire film. Sides, just the actors' words, music manuscript for the song, and a cassette with the song played on piano. Now, if you go to an audition and you have that kind of equipment to prepare yourself, who can't audition well? I mean, you know everything, and I'm one of those idiots who reads the entire script. I want to find out how does this character fit in and relationship to what. I sat there going, oh my golly, this is good, I like this. Then I got hungry and I thought, I want to do this, but there's no guarantee. It's like Vegas odds. You have to audition. I auditioned 3 times for acting and 3 times for singing. They knew exactly what they wanted. They knew brilliant people to audition for, very courteous, very helpful, directed you in areas that they wanted you to go in to explore, I guess, to see if you could take direction. I sweat bullets. I really sweat bullets because I thought, I want to do this, but I knew there were some other lovely people up for it, and it's the grab of the bag, I went out and celebrated the day I was told I got this, and I was so thrilled and so excited, and then we began to work. I haven't worked so hard in years, but I love to work for people who know what they want. And they aren't going to take less than that. And these people knew exactly what they wanted, and they were not going to take less than that. And they worked me to the nth degree, and I thank them for it. Because I think the overall film is marvelous, but what they did for that character, not only in animation, but the sense of where they wanted the character to go. Actors are only interpretive artists, and we're here with our bag of tricks to help you complete what you wish to do. And they had me bring some tricks out I didn't know I was capable of bringing. So 2 years ago, it was like a Broadway show. We met in a recording studio, all the actors, the producers, the directors, and a pianist, and we all sat and read the film from the top with the numbers and sequences they came, did an entire reading. That's the last time I ever saw any of the actors till last Tuesday. From there on in, we went into sessions. I worked 2 years, I'd say about every 3 months. I'd go and maybe do 6 hours, 4 hours, whatever. We did probably 10 sessions for the dialogue and about 6 sessions musically. That's just for me. whatever hours and offices and the rest of it for the other characters because you literally don't see each other. Now, people say, well, isn't that difficult? Well, of course it is, but I've done cartoon characters. This is the first time I've done an animated feature. And that first day was very important. I think they were smart to have us all sit down because I knew the big scene was the scene with Ariel, so I remembered Jodie's face. And I remembered her demeanor. And I thought, I've got to blow that little girl out of the water with this. So I kept her persona in my mind. So I could have that ugly, villainous woman just knock that poor little ingenue crazy. Right? I think I succeeded. I hope so. Because that's what they want.
You had seen the artist rendition of Ursula.
We saw storyboards, which are the drawings. Now, I don't remember any color, but I knew she was going to be in basic black because she is, no alleviating light in that old thing. Totally black in every sense of being. I find nothing redeemable in her at all. There's no sparkle of adorability in her. She is pure rotten to the core, Maud.
To play someone mean is heavenly.
It is, as an aficionado of the amiable, which I have been all of my life, it is so freeing to be an absolute unmitigated villainess. I adore it. I hope more people ask me to do it. It's glorious. I'll be anybody's villain.
If Cinderella's stepsister grew up, though, she might become Ursula. Right?
When she grew up, if she ever got the knees fixed, because basically she was a grump because her knee hurt. You know what pain does to people.
What happened to that? So 1973, the last time that was on the air, it was CBS, right?
Yeah, 10 years. Well, it was on the air 10 years, and then the second generation who had grown up with it began writing the Rodgers and Hammerstein office saying, when can we see Cinderella again? Rodgers and Hammerstein bought it from CBS and put it into video and then sold it to somebody else. We know leverage takeovers. And now it's out on video. And I can't tell you the number of video stores I go into and the people say, it's selling great. I say, good.
It's like the first one on my block to have it. Everybody came over to see it. It was
and the old thing that kind of holds up, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. But I mean, the point I was getting at is it was on the air all the time, and then when
10
it
years.
went off the air, I thought that maybe there was some kind of a...
No, because the contractual agreement was for it to be on the air 10 years, and then CBS just kept it in a vault, I suppose, and that was it. And then it showed up because I had to sign a release because at that time we had no video things. This is in the 60s, and there were, I guess the brighter people were thinking of videos in the future, but there were no contracts for them. So I had to sign a contract that much later to release it for videos.
Tell us about being involved, though, in something as eternal as that and as this.
Well, in the one case, I meet young people today and they check my knees, which are really bad now. And I keep saying I forgot to take the unicorn away. In many areas, I'm known strictly from Cinderella. Now, I did not realize, I just knew I wanted to do this project, but until my kids one night said, Mom, I don't have any grandchildren, and I'm not a pushy mother, so I'm not pleading or anything. They said, Mom, do you realize by doing this picture, which might become a classic, as many of the Disney things have done, that your grandchildren may only know you from this? And I said, oh, God, don't tell them. That's my grandmother, that evil, horrible old squid. But I suddenly thought, it is true. You keep forgetting that Disney product is not faddish. I mean, it stays there. Those things that are the best of the Disney stable just stay, and each generation of children coming up, it's there. It's like fairy tales, isn't it? I mean, we have that little Gordian knot with all of us of shared, those cultural things that we all share, fairy tales, certain music, and that's what makes us able to speak with each other. So I hope, it is my sincere hope that this picture becomes one of the Disney classics. I would love that. I would love to be, I'm even now happy to be associated with, but wouldn't that be great?
Do you sort of sense that it will be?
I think it should be. I think it's just frightfully well done. I really do. Even the romance in it, I found myself hooked. Well, those two kids make it. Now, I knew they were going to. But I think so, and I love the music. I danced in my chair to Under the Sea. I love that. And wasn't that marvelous to make Sebastian a Calypso character? Is that special or what? I just love it. I love the opening because it puts us right into the mood of where we're going to be, half on the earth and in the sea as well. I thought that was beautifully done. Beautifully done.
Tell us about your work of late. A lot of stage stuff.
Yeah.
You've got another stage project coming up. It seems as if Hollywood has said, we'll let her do her stage stuff. We're not going to beg her. You're not going to do that much screen work.
All they have to do is ask. One can't sit at home and not work, because I think for actors, you're only an actor when you're working, and I've done it for 40 years. Thank you, good Lord. I'm very fortunate, but I've always had a theory. A theatrical career is like 4 burners on a stove, and you've got 4 little pots. Now, one pot may be bubbling. That's great. Keep a low fire under the other 3 pots, right? So when this fire dies down or it burns out, then you turn up the heat under the other little pot. So for me, the theater is where I started. That's where I learned what I do. And I go back there to get my batteries charged. And it's always there, and I always feel that the work I do in the theater can only better equip me for whatever I'm going to do in television and film. You don't learn anything in television because you crank out whatever you've been charged from elsewhere doing. Television has been extremely good to me, and I'm certainly not biting the hand that's fed me. But you know what you're going to do in television. In the theater, I never know. Like, I'm playing my first trousers role this spring. I'm playing Falstaff in The Merry Wives of Windsor at the Shakespeare Theater at the Folger in Washington, D.C. And we think, at this point, as much research as we've done, I think I'm the first woman who has ever attempted this. Now, we know at least 6 ladies have attempted Hamlet. But I would not be interested in that because it's totally a male character. But Falstaff in The Merry Wives is like a panto. It's bigger than life. It shouldn't be done seriously because the play at its best is not one of the great ones. So to me it is a pantomime, and I found no problem in suggesting that I do this, and they loved it. They loved the idea, and I passed my beard and mustache test, so I'm going to do it. So you don't know, maybe in the future somebody will see me in a trouser roll and film.
What is the last major Hollywood feature you were involved in?
Late 60s with Six You Get Egg Roll with Doris Day. That's how long since I've done a feature.
I do a 60s show, and I noticed that early 60s you were on Danny Thomas' show.
Yes, which is now having revival because of Nick at Night.
What was the time like? What was that era like? Everyone talks about how the 60s were such a special decade. Was it, or...?
It was an overlay from the 50s. Do you know, because there were certain... Well, it was interesting. They had on Joan Rivers' show the other day, they had 3 of the kids, Angela Cartwright from the Danny Thomas Show, Paul Peterson, and one of the kids from, I think, the Donna Reed Show, one from My 3 Sons, Donna Reed Show, and Danny Thomas. And they were all talking about the shibboleths and the taboos in television in that era. Like, you never saw a married couple in a double bed. It was always twin beds, right? And kissing was the most. No frontal nudity, thank you very much. Times were different. It was just a different time reflecting those times. And is the interest in these series now projecting any kind of thought that people might like to return to a simpler kind of mores? Who knows? Or is it just antiquities they're looking at and getting a kick out of? But I think the laughter holds as true on those situations because they always had a little moral to them, if you remember. There was always a little wrap up the end. I can't say that things are better or worse with sitcoms. I think some of the things they've done dramatically, like St. Elsewhere's and L.A. Law, and the one before that, Hill Street Blues, I think have been breakthroughs. The sitcoms today, I think, are more sophisticated, and I think some of them are magnificent. But there's kind of a simplicity about the old sitcoms that I like to see them. They tickle me because I'm nostalgic for that time. But it was great fun to work with, I must say.
Did you catch yourself bringing out Ursula on the streets when you're driving if someone cuts you out?
No, I do Pat then. And very well.
Do you know Roz Lips?
Yes.
In New York?
Yes.
She's recommended you to play her in the movie that they've optioned her book
Really?
to make a movie, and she's asked for you to do it. So if you hear about it, I hope I was the first to tell you.
Oh, I love it. I would be happy to do it.
Yeah.
I hope she wants kind of an Ursula
Roz
thing.
Lips in New York. There, she has a company called
this
Lip
marvelous?
Service, and she deals with.
I haven't even
celebrities,
seen this.
and
Give me a
they're
name.
publishing. They optioned her book.
Oh, isn't that? Oh, look at there.
Okay, so Pat Carroll, any closing comments regarding Pat Carroll?
Well, I have no idea what she was looking at the end. We let the tape run a little bit longer than, after the interview ended, people were asking for autographs. And She was making some comments. My best guess is that she's talking about the black and white glossies that would come with the press notes. I think she was commenting on one of the pictures of her. But this was 1989, and we really have no way of knowing. But I wanted to leave it in anyway because, it's just part of the personality of the interview.
Yeah, a little tidbit, guys. We used to get these things called press kits, and they're now whenever we get press kits, they're just via the computer, and we download the images and the production notes. But we'd actually get the production notes on paper with the aforementioned 8x10, 8x11 glossies that we could use for print or whatnot. And sometimes we get the slides too, color slides from the films.
I never used to keep them. I would throw them out, and I'm really kicking myself for it now because I think they're probably pretty valuable.
Yeah, they would have been great mementos too, just to have.
It would just be nice to have.
Yeah.
These old classic films. Oh, well.
What we do have, though, is valuable coming up right now. And I'm excited about what we have next.
All right. That was a little corny.
That was corny?
Yeah, it was.
Coming up next is something really not so corny, though. I'm corny, but what's coming up next is good, bad.
Sure.
Sure.
Next up, we've got Howard Ashman and Alan Menken.
I like that better.
This is a pretty rare interview. I mean, I guess they all are, but this one in particular because there's not a lot of tape on Howard Ashman.
You really get the shift. This interview, this is the duo that pretty much, I don't want to say started all, but shifted things in a new direction, like you were saying, Matt. So I really enjoyed this interview coming up.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Howard Ashman was the lyricist and Alan Menken was the composer. He wrote all the music. And the two of them worked together. They did Little Shop of Horrors before this. And then afterwards, they did Beauty and the Beast. And then about half the songs on Aladdin because Howard Ashman died of AIDS while they were in the middle of that. So Tim Rice came in and wrote the lyrics on the rest of the songs. Now, Alan Menken is still around, and he keeps himself busy, mostly writing Broadway show tunes with a few different lyricists. Ashman, as I say, died on March 14th, 1991, at the age of 40. That was just under a year and a half after this interview. And it was tragic, not just for the people who knew him, but for music lovers everywhere, because the guy really was a genius. I mean, you listen to his lyrics, and they're touching, they're clever, they're witty, they reveal character, they move the story along. They do everything a show tune should do. The guy really knew his stuff. And personally, as a fan, I mourn all the amazing songs he would have written that we'll never get to hear. He was just getting started. But how great that we have this record right here of Howard in his prime talking about his process. And I can tell you with authority that nobody else has this. I know a guy who spent years looking for this very interview, and they weren't in the Disney vaults, they weren't anywhere. It turns out we had it. And now you guys are the first to hear this extremely rare tape since 1989. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Howard Ashman and Alan Menken.
You want to know who I am. I want to know who you are, but it's...
I've been wondering all morning.
Oh, God. Thank you. I'm Barbara Bladen from San Francisco.
Barbara. Nice
How
to
do you
meet you.
do?
Howard Ashman, Alan Menken.
We can introduce you.
Alan Menken.
Hello. Hi. I'm Melinda Rubin from Premier Radio Networks.
Barry Kutchik from Cutler Radio.
Great.
Hi, I'm Catherine Hinman from Orlando Sunrise.
Wow, local girl.
Yeah. Can you both just say your names on tape, just so we know your voices?
Sure. Howard Ashman sounds like this. Alan Menken sounds like this.
Great.
Have you seen the movie yet?
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen
Oh, yeah.
Yes. What was your, I mean, we were just talking about We Love the Movie. What was your review?
I was
What's he gonna say?
thrilled. It's wonderful. And as in any process, I'll go back to Ron and John and I go, that little musical hit I had over there, and you that mixed down over there. But I mean, they're tiny things. I just get such a kick out of this.
My friends are real nervous because I basically hate everything I do and everything I'm connected with. My friends are this is like the first thing I've ever done that I go, they say, how's the movie? It's really good. It's real. I really like it. And it's partly, I think, there are so many people involved. I mean, if you look at those end titles, it looks like the Vietnam Memorial. It is a list of names that goes on forever. It's the most deeply collaborative medium imaginable, and you just can't understand until you've been through it. how many people it takes and how deep all of the contributions run.
And you hadn't done animation before?
Never had, and it's just remarkable.
So what was the most shocking thing to you when you got in there and you're doing it? What was like? What did you not believe?
I couldn't believe that so many things, but that the voices come first. That everything happens, everything springs from sound. That the acting is there in the voice, in the actor's performance, and that a man is sitting there drawing what that actor is providing strictly vocally, and very much so in the staging of the songs. That we did very complete demos of the songs. Alan on his synthesizers made all kinds of little, orchestral miracles, and these things turned into the bubbles and the fish and the jokes. Remarkable, and you don't really think of it as being that way, that it all does begin with sound. It's really fascinating, and how many people are involved. The numbers are just staggering.
Did you come up with some of these ideas for the songwriting? I hear songwriting routines. People have to sit at a certain table, and do you sit there and say, "Okay, I'm gonna write a song like Kiss the Girl"?
Yeah, that's what you do.
And where do the ideas come from? It just
those places ideas come from. I mean, I don't think anybody can answer that. They certainly come from the script.
Yeah, they come from the story, and they come from experience of having written musicals and knowing that there are certain necessities to storytelling through song. And Howard is, will always, in this case, conceive, the song moments, and comes in very much with a stylistic edge to every song, and then we sit down and we work on it.
I wanted to talk about the sort of New Yorkiness of this particular production. I think it's what separates it from all the other Disney animated films I've ever seen. Think of some of the old fairy tale features they've done. Cinderella, even the big, quote, showstoppers in that. Real sort of mainstream, no real edges on those songs. I mean, most of it, and that's sort of what makes this unique. Were there any sort of problems in fusing your New York roots and the Hollywood-based animators? I mean, we had heard of them not being able to find any actors from LA, which I think is sort of wonderful.
I think we were really fortunate that Ron Clements, who's probably much too shy to mention it, is a musical comedy buff, and he has a great collection of musical comedy records and an appreciation of the stylistic bent that goes into musical comedy writing. And John is also a musical guy. I forget what he plays. I think he does trumpet or something. But he actually, both of these men are people who carry tunes and are musically oriented and have some appreciation of theater music. And I think that helps a lot. I think if you were making the same film with directors who were basically, began and ended with pop music, you'd have a harder time.
I think the New Yorkiness also is, again, going back to the word musical. We are people who work in a medium called the American Musical Theater, which seems to be a very suffering medium right now. But
I also think there's more musical theater in the old Disney cartoons than you're giving them credit for. When the dwarfs sing "We dig, dig, dig" the whole day through, that could be a chorus entrance from almost any operetta of the late 1920s, early 1930s. And the kinds of songs that Snow White's given, from "I'm Wishing," that's very much like the kinds of songs that were written for the Vagabond King. You've got to remember, the Broadway musical was closer to operetta in the 1930s than it is now. And the use of music in Snow White goes back to a theater tradition, I think.
But after that, I mean...
then it changed.
Right, between
Absolutely.
40 and now. And even look at the Jungle Book.
It changed a lot.
That's true, but there's a great tradition of New York creative people coming, out and working on projects. I mean, we're talking about the difference of 2,000 miles, but they're the same industry, really.
But we were really, we tried real hard. I mean, it was a conscious thing to try to integrate the acting and the singing. John and Ron felt from the beginning that it was important that the actors did their own singing before the show was cast. And this may be the only film ever made where literally everybody who sings also does does the acted performance. There is no moment where a voice has come in from outside and been dropped in because somebody couldn't hit a note. Even the performances that you think are the actors, very often there are notes here and there that are dropped in. Absolutely nothing was dropped in here. It was created very much like a stage piece would be. And the actors came from New York because that's where the people live who have that particular training. The acting/singing thing is not much required in California. That's not work for those people. So musical theater performers gravitate to New York City, and we did a lot of casting in New York City. And my God, I saw Pat Carroll in On the Town when I was, 12 years old or something.
I do a 60s show, a musical oriented show. What are some of your musical influences that growing up?
Musical influences.
Not as relate to this particularly, but just as
in general, please. What did you listen
you grew up for a long time. When I was a kid, the first thing I listened to was Beethoven and Brahms, and I would conduct the symphonies, and then I was brought up in a family that loved musical theater, so I knew all the shows. And then, like everyone else, when the Beatles and Rolling Stones and all that happened, I started my bands and was playing all over, and so it was a blend of all those, and I think Howard
Julie Stein's Peter Pan score was probably the first thing I ever memorized. I knew every word of it. I could do all of Captain Hook. And biggest thrill of my life was I was sitting in a Chinese restaurant in New York, and I heard some people say, "Oh, sing Seymour's song, sing Seymour's song," and I saw this little 5-year-old kid performing "Grow for Me" from Little Shop of Horrors, for his family. I said, "My God, that's me being Captain Hook." I grew up with show music in a very serious way. Then when I was a teenager, R&B got in there, and girl groups and all that stuff.
Is there a song from that time period that brings you back? You have music as a special power. You can be driving, you hear a song, maybe it's a Beatles song. It just takes you right back to the 60s.
Yeah, mostly Shangri-La's and Crystals and Ronettes, mostly those particular kinds of girl groups. Shangri-La's were white, but mostly black girl groups from that period.
That's impossible. Everything takes me back.
Yeah, I did. It was great.
You connect the moments of your life by, whether it's Abbey Road or it's lightning strikes, whatever it is, you're at different points of your life.
Maybe because of Babylon,
I think the producers. I know it's changed subject.
Yeah, I am. But however, I started to get rid of them just because there's too many of them. I have piles that I give away. You want to keep
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's
this version.
Gotta ask my 60s question.
It's fine.
When we had the producers and writers over here, we were talking about how they had a completely different idea of what the crowd was going to be like, and then you came in and said, "This is going to be Jamaican." And what made you think that? Why?
Really hard writing a fairy tale to get a contemporary edge into the score without violating the mood. I think it would really be very difficult to not violate the mood of a fairy tale and write songs that sound like Prince. I just think that would be really hard to do, and hard to write storytelling songs and songs that kids can grab onto easily. And really use a thoroughly contemporary rock idiom. So what do? You're living in a time when pop music is really splintered. And one thing that I did was just go, if we could use a little bit of reggae, if we could use a little bit of contemporary Caribbean feeling music, it would give it that contemporary edge. It would give it a rhythmic thrust that kids would enjoy. I like Caribbean music, and it has an energy. It's a question of the up numbers. It's a question of how do you do everybody knows what a ballad sounds like, but how do you do the numbers that are supposed to be the rhythm numbers, the production numbers, the up numbers, the things that are supposed to get you moving a little bit, and how do you find a way to do that without violating the mood of a fairy tale? And somehow Caribbean music is timeless. It's also water-oriented, right? There are islands, and you hear the music, and you think about water and ocean and all of that.
Yeah, it does. It combines both, present-day pop and also the timelessness because you can hear some Harry Belafonte in there too. It takes you back over a long period of time, and that's very important.
When you listen to it, I was listening to it going, these songs could be hits.
Well, that'd be nice, but
the lyrics, they're singing, they're fish singing or doing whatever.
And they're singing about fish the whole time. It's gonna be hard to
You could double bill it with The Abyss. That'd be a great double bill. Something for the whole family.
Well, that's very much what we face with Little Shop. The score is the hit, I hope.
What we try to do is, obviously, you're trying really hard to serve the story and keep the story moving and to provide several things at one time, something to listen to that's enjoyable, that's fun, that captures something emotional, and also moves the story forward. You're trying to do so many things at one time in a song. The last thing that you have time to do, I think, is to go, now, can this be a hit song too? I don't know how you can serve that many masters,
I think people
Andrew Lloyd Webber does.
I think so, except if you can tell me what the hit song is from Phantom of the Opera, you've done pretty well. And it's a different kind of those songs are not top 40 radio hits. They're theater songs.
Phantom. It's like a disco Phantom.
Yeah.
How was your dealing with the Disney animators? And I don't know how much you know about the history of Disney animation, musicians and the songwriters applying their craft to Disney animated films, but do you know if your dealings with them was unique? I mean,
I think in many respects our dealings with them was kind of a throwback to how the work was done, on the earlier classics, where the composer would be, in the room with the animators, and there would be very much a symbiotic process where they could, weren't just saying here's a song, that we've written and work with it. We very much have a back and forth and a give and take, and it's a lot of demoing that we did. And I think it benefited all of us that we did it that way.
So recently, say with Oliver, we know that a lot of the songs were just written independent, like Dean Pitchford and yada yada would write songs, with a basic idea, and that would be it. But you guys sat with the animators and developed everything.
We really are one team, very much on this property.
Oliver was a totally different process, though. Oliver was done much more like a live-action film was done, and the concept of how music was to be used in Oliver is very much the way music's used in live action, by and large, maybe with the exception of that Nibbler song, which has a kind of a Broadway feel to it. But basically, very few times are lips moving and people singing on camera while you're hearing music in Oliver. It's a different way of doing a movie musical. It's neither better nor worse. It's simply different. This is much more the old style.
Where we are different is that I utilize the technology of using the computer and the MIDI instruments, if you know what I mean by that. There's basically synthesizers, and it's coming to the point where songs can be treated the way words treated with the word processor. It's a very flexible process, and it has its own kinks in it that created a lot of frustration for us at various points. But we developed a style that is very modern in terms of studio work and the art of demoing. And then when we went to the final, that was a whole other process, and we learned a lot from that. When you're dealing with something that's written free time, not to click, and then bringing in an orchestra and having that orchestra play free time, and you have to adhere to the vocals that they've already animated to. It's a very sophisticated learning process we went through.
We're starting to work on Beauty and the Beast now, and what we're very much thinking of doing this time is even taking the process one step further and recording the complete orchestrations, not before animation even begins, because the animators used our synthesized orchestrations so intensely and in such a specific sense that we're figuring this time why not just do the whole thing right up front, which is even more of a throwback to the old days.
It is.
It's really the way to the old days, to the way cartoons used to be made, even before there were feature-length cartoons. Even in all of the old shorts, basically, the silly symphonies were done to classical music pieces. And it's just, there's probably a reason that it all evolved that way. There's something very comfortable about animating to music. There's something that just works between the two things.
So why did they stop?
Isn't that interesting? I don't know.
Why did they stop working in that way? It may have been. Well, certainly there's a pressure to spin off hits from a project and therefore to replace songs and to.
Certainly, when the Sherman Brothers worked, in a song like "The Bare Necessities," I think that probably was recorded. I couldn't vouch for it, but I'll bet that was recorded and produced as a song and animated subsequently. I would pretty much bet. There is a period. It's not like you just do the song and hand it to the animators. There's a period while you're developing the song where you work really closely with the directors and with the animators, and the storyboards evolve as they listen to the demos and they get presented to you, and you suggest things, and they come back with other visual ideas. It's like the process of working with a choreographer in musical theater.
And also, they'll ask me, since I was doing the score as well. There are points where they'll say, well, we have a storm sequence and we'd like some, we could either use, Victory at Sea or something, or we can use something that you'll give us. And I said, well, by all means, use something that I'll give you, knowing that they may get married to it, and then fall in love with it. Such a thing as demo love. But, you're involved very early on in creating the mood of a scene and creating the themes that are later going to be used throughout the whole picture.
Can I ask Mr. Ashman just one question? When you work in a regular movie, a normal movie, there's that element of anything could go wrong. The weather, the budget, your backers could drop out, all that. Yeah. Aren't you going to feel that you'll miss that edge of danger? I mean, what can go wrong with a Disney movie except that the public doesn't like it, which is way after the fact.
Which is the worst thing that could possibly go wrong.
Well, I know, but there's no danger inherent in the process of...
I understand.
You get used to it.
It's interesting. No creative process is without some element of tension, of conflict. There's plenty of creative tension, especially in a medium as wildly collaborative as this is, where there are 300 people in a building all doing one tiny little corner of the piece. There's plenty of tension to go around. And there's plenty that can go wrong. Things come in with green hair, and it costs a lot of money to fix green hair. If the hair comes out purple, it costs a fortune to send that back and repaint those cells. Yeah. So there's an awful lot that can happen, and sometimes the dialogue doesn't match the looks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's nothing for you to say. We have picked their brains, I'll tell you.
So that was a very, very rare interview.
Yeah.
And hard to beat that interview. But since then, I don't remember ever getting Jeffrey Katzenberg for a roundtable. Do you?
Yeah, he used to participate quite a bit.
Maybe a press conference for DreamWorks, maybe something like that. I just don't remember.
Remember, this was 1989. There were quite a few.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as long as Disney was putting out big movies, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, I think he did all of those.
Really? Okay.
Pretty sure. He was a kind of a mainstay on the press junket scene.
I don't remember him. My horrible memory then. I'll defer to you.
It was part of his job while he was at Disney. He was the chairman of the Walt Disney Company. And I want to say there's kind of this myth that has been perpetuated for decades that there's this war going on between the creatives and the executives, and especially at Disney. And the idea is that the creatives are in it for the art and the suits only care about the money and the merchandise. And I've just never found that to be true. Because I've known my share of executives, especially at Disney, over my time in the industry. And I've always found that the executives are very passionate about the art. They also have to make the stockholders happy. That is part of their job. That is part of their responsibility. And so they have to say things like, we can't have stripes on that shirt. Let's make it a design instead. Little things that maybe are not so important, but it kind of rubs people the wrong way, the directors or whatever, when they wanted to have stripes. But they really do care about the quality of the movie, and they do care about letting the artists express themselves. And I think Jeffrey Katzenberg is a really good example of this.
I think one of the really cool takeaways, because I'm not good at stress, I crumble under pressure.
I'm aware of this.
Yeah.
You're doing it right now.
I'm crumbling as we speak. The thing I really loved about the interview was he said, when someone asked him about all the stress that he has in his life, he just bluntly says, I thrive on it. The fact that he thrives on stress and all the rumors. You were talking about the creative executives and the actual filmmakers and all that stuff like that. all the rumors surrounding Katzenberg and his rule or command over Disney, he said, sometimes the myth is more fascinating than the reality.
Right.
So, he knows there's a divide between the reporting regarding what he does and the actual truth. And he says sometimes having that myth out there is fine. He seemed very plain-spoken during the interview.
There's a movie that I can recommend right now. It's called Waking Sleeping Beauty. Mm-hmm. And it tells the story of these years at Disney when they were kind of on the upswing. And it's really interesting. And Jeffrey Katzenberg is a big part of that story. So I recommend you guys check that out. It's a documentary. It's called Waking Sleeping Beauty. Getting back to the interview.
Yeah.
So to put this into context, Oliver and Company had come out 1 year earlier. And it had been a hit, but it wasn't like a Little Mermaid-sized hit. But the Disney company was on the upswing. Oliver made $74 million. The Little Mermaid made $111 million, which is its lifetime gross to date. And that's box office only, not counting video. But this was definitely a period where the movies were getting better, the box office was getting better, they were doing very well. Now, 1 year later, they put out The Rescuers Down Under, which didn't do nearly as well, and it kind of sent them a message that maybe they shouldn't be doing non-musicals. So they kind of abandoned that for quite some time and they only did musicals, which is fine by me. I kind of prefer the musicals anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They keep bringing in these Broadway songwriters, which I'm also big fans of. And so, the whole thing works for me. Everyone's doing excellent work, and animation is a great place for Broadway sensibility. So I'm all for that. The last thing I want to say is there's another beep edit in here from when the tape ends. So, as always, sorry, but that's what it is. Anything else you want to say about Katzenberg before we get started?
I have nothing else to say. Just be aware of the beep. It's very considerate of you, Matt, to forewarn listeners about the beep.
I'm here to help.
We're here to help. More importantly, here is Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Jeffrey Katzenberg, if you'll introduce yourselves around so I know who's here. Hi, I'm Catherine Henry of Orlando.
How are you?
Barry Crunchy Cutler Radio, syndicated.
I'm Melinda Rubin from your radio network. Nice to meet you.
Ernie Tucker, Songwriters.
Rochelle Gorman Foy, Middlesex News.
Barbara Blade in San Francisco.
Hi, good to see you. Yes, we have indeed. A couple of familiar faces.
Well, they give good story. All of them are just really.
Well, now you get to deal with a boring executive.
I want to know if I read so much about you. Do you read all the things that are printed about you? Every magazine, every paper, every time I turn around, if it's not the business page, it's the entertainment page. Do you read all that stuff, or do you just don't have time for it all?
No, you read some of it, no. All I can tell you is the myth is much, much more fun than the reality. I don't actually do all those things that they
You're highly visible,
say I do.
that's for sure.
What's the strangest thing you've heard about yourself reading one of those articles?
I'll pass on that.
Well, the reality of it is that you're turning out very good product.
Thank you.
That's got to be just, that's the bottom line, isn't it?
Well, we've been very lucky. So, the thing about me is that I run scared. So, I'm concerned that the last success is in fact the last success, and maybe that's part of what keeps us going is that, I'm more worried about what's next than
What I gather from talking with some of the other people, though, is that the changes in the Disney operation have been very positive, and that what seems to be evident to me is that you're very open for outside influences. I think bringing in Ashman is probably a stroke of genius on this movie. It doesn't have a look. It has the look, but it's already beyond. It's in a new mode.
Well, I think that is, if you actually go back and look at it in a historical perspective, I would like to take credit for it, but I'm going to have to defer to Mr. Disney himself. That is Walt. That's what he did. He relied on the greatest artists in the world, and used as inspiration not only great artists from around the world to come in as consultants on it, but actually studied other works of arts, of classic art And if you go back and which I have done now, and really you look at the design and the production of, say, a Pinocchio, it had a very specific look. It came off of a European art style that very much appealed to him, and he found reference pieces of art that inspired his artists. We've done exactly the same thing. We have used all the tools of all the worlds, and it is, and we just are each time hopefully reaching for a notch higher than where we've been before, or a notch different at least.
Notch different, yeah.
You mentioned you went back. Were you a fan of Disney growing up?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think as much as all of us, I grew up on these films and saw them, and I never ever appreciated them the way I do now. And I mean, an interesting thing is that I would say that if you asked me to identify the thing that I enjoy most and find most rewarding in my job at Disney, it is this. It is working in animation. It is the thing that is most gratifying, and it is, given the choice every day, I would prefer to head to the animation building than to the office and make my 200 phone calls and 6 breakfasts and 45 meetings and wheeling and dealing and tough businessmen and hard deal makers and all of the other baloney of the myth. But the place it is I'm hooked, completely gone.
It seems as if with this particular film, at least from a critic standpoint, as if the studio is finally back in terms of its animated stuff. Oliver was a nice pop film. Great Mouse Detective was a decent film. This movie is truly in the classic tradition of Disney. Not just the fairy tales, but even the depth of the visuals. And I want to find out, do you think I'm off the mark? I mean,
well, no, but it's a little bit difficult for us to pat ourselves on the back. So I'm the only thing I would caution a little bit about, in that I don't, in my mind, I would agree with you that if Oliver really represented the revitalization of Disney as an animated company and was really hitting our stride in terms of our productivity, my personal taste and feeling is that Mermaid represents a renaissance for the art. But the danger in that is that if you go back and you really examine what Walt Disney did for about 20 years or so, is he used classic fairy tale literature as the inspiration for his movies, which tend to use a less graphic form of art to realize themselves. And then he got bored with that and moved into contemporary stories, which 101 Dalmatians and Lady and the Tramp were the beginning of the evolution of it, because he just didn't want to do any more fairy tales. And what we said to you last year, and I still feel today, is that we should be doing both. And I don't want us to feel as though, because of whatever critical success this movie has, that now we should only do fairy tales and we should only do French 19th century Southern European design to our films. There's a very lush and very rich and very warm piece to it, and that suddenly we should say that, well, we shouldn't do something that's very graphic and contemporary and all of that. I would say to you that we invested every bit as much money in Oliver as we did in this movie. The same animators who did that movie did do this movie, and there were as many cells, and there were as many drawings, and there were as many hours, and the music was, which, by the way, Mr. Ashman and Menken also did some songs for that. It's a different film, and it's, as I go back, and it's like, looking at a Monet and saying that that's, one kind, and saying that David Hockney is something else, and you can walk in and they are both great works of art, and but they're different things appeal to different people, and I'm not sure that anybody wants if they had the ability to only have Monets on their wall. You want variety, and our artists have to have variety, or they frankly will not be stimulated. It's the fact they came from Oliver onto Mermaid that it was such a change. They went from one gear into another gear, and we must do that every time with them, or they'll stagnate. I promise you, their work will become the same.
But our job here is to try and put this in some sense of historical perspective.
Well, you got to do that. I can't.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you're in a better position than anybody else.
Yeah. Problem is, if I do it, it is so self-aggrandizing. It's you'd be nauseous.
But certainly there was a return. There was some decision a few years ago when you came into Disney, and as well as Mr. Eisner, that you would return to animation in force. And you committed to a fairly ambitious schedule now, and it's the Rescuers next year, and as I understand, Beauty and the Beast next. So, can you talk about that decision?
Well, I think that's an easy one to talk about, because that's not about quality, that's about commitment. And so the question is, you can make the commitment, and you can set the goal, which we did, and I would just share with you the reason for doing that is that animation is the foundation on which this whole company is built. It is our soul. And you're down here at Disney World, and if you travel through this park, you will see that at every turn, in every place that you go, at its very core is animation and the characters that have been created out of animation, even as we sit here today. As contemporary as this place has been, and as explosive as it has been, we are completely affected by this heritage, which is animated film. And television, by the way, also has become equally important, as you know, and there's 25 million viewers a week are seeing Chip and Dale and DuckTales, so that's obviously becoming a cultural phenomena of its own. But our feeling is given that is our heritage, we have had an obligation to not allow that to get pushed back into some secondary position of importance in this company. That we could not allow the profitability of these parks, which are, as we all know, are just extraordinary businesses, and the appeal of us being able to put our imprimaturs on Touchstone and something that's comfortable and easy, because that's our roots. That's Michael's and mine. Our heritage is much less than the Disney heritage, because we've been at this 15 years, and Disney's been at it 75 years, so we got a long way to go yet. So animation just really, for us, was just like one of the fundamental things. And unfortunately, it takes so long for it to realize it, that for the first 4 years that we were here at the company, you didn't hear a lot in it because we didn't have a lot to show yet. But when we came in on the first day, we were no less ambitious about what we were going to do in that area of the company than we've been in all the other areas of the company. It has simply taken much longer for us to hit our stride and to realize it. When we came here, there were less than 175 employees in the animation company. Today there are over 500 in Los Angeles and close to 100 here in Florida. In our television animation company, we have over 600 employees in Florida. We've opened a studio in France that's got 150 employees. In Paris, we have just opened one in London that's got nearly 100. We have a studio in Hong Kong. We have a studio in Taiwan. We have a studio in South Korea. We have a studio in Japan. We have a studio in Sydney, Australia. There are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people working on Disney animated product throughout the world.
And reading through your bio, you're pretty much in charge of those thousands and thousands. Do you ever sit back and look at yourself and say, does it ever get to you, like, too much stress, or you easygoing? You seem easygoing.
No, I thrive on it. It is, I think that I don't see any of these things as a burden. I guess, some people in life find work a burden and a necessary evil, and to me, I thrive on it. It is. I'm having a great time and feel challenged at it, and feel as productive today as at any time I've ever felt before. So it is getting big. It's a little scary, but
looking further down the road, what's on the boards for? Let's see, it's Rescuers Down Under with
Rescuers Down Under and a Mickey Mouse Prince and the Pauper is a double bill. This is the first double bill I think we've ever done. Because it's a featurette. We've never distributed a featurette theatrically. Mickey's Christmas Carol went out in a very limited way for a short period of time, and this is envisioned as a double bill and is being designed as a double bill to play as a packaged, two films at once.
It's going to be shorter.
Yes.
It is.
Yes, probably be under 70 minutes, and the Prince and the Pauper will be somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. And then beyond that, the next film will be Beauty and the Beast. So again, we're back at a fairy tale there, and there are then 3 projects that come after that are well into the development stage of it, and they're sort of each on a track, and I believe all 3 will ultimately be made. I just can't tell you which one comes first, second, or third. We are doing a film called An Arabian Night, which is the story of Aladdin, and then we are doing Swan Lake, which we have a wonderful musical, but again, fairy tale. And then the third one, Jungle King, out in the jungle.
These aren't contemporary.
I would say that the Rescuers is. Right. Beauty and the Beast obviously isn't, and An Arabian Night is not. Swan Lake is not. King of the Jungle, I guess, really is. It's not a period piece, so it's not. It's really timeless.
So do you have another contemporary idea?
Oh yeah, I mean there are probably 35 projects in various different.
Will be coming up in the next couple of years.
It's tough to tell. I mean, what we try and do is that we've got a lot of balls up in the air, and what will determine is, frankly, which ones come together and are the strongest stories and the strongest characters in it, and that's just an evolutionary process, and it's difficult to predict which one's going to come out better. It's a little bit like in our, feature film development. I mean, there are 80 or 90 projects in development in Touchstone, and 80 or 90 that are in development in Hollywood, and 50 or 60 in Disney, and it's pretty tough for me to predict, well, what will be the next one that will happen? I don't know.
How many of all of those will actually become movies?
In the animated or in the feature?
In the feature. Start out with
well, for us, and it's just everybody has their own style in it. I would probably say a good 40% of them over the next 10 years. We tend to be very loyal about ideas. When we find an idea that we like, they tend to wear well with us, which is we don't lose interest in them, and so we don't put a lot of things into development, and when we do, it tends to be something that we actually like a lot, and even if it has to go through many drafts or many different forms in order to finally realize itself into what we saw in it originally, we tend to stick with things a long time.
Speaking of development, what in your mind came up as pros and cons when someone said, how about doing animation in Little Mermaid?
There was no con in it. I mean, John Musker came in and presented in a 2-page outline what he envisioned the story to be, and it was a no-brainer, as they say. It just was obvious, I think.
No doubt about it.
No. As by the way, I felt that way about Beauty and the Beast and An Arabian Night and King of the Jungle and Swan Lake. They have so much potential to them, and they are so adaptable to what we do, and they have a foundation to them that is so strong for us to build on, that I believe all of those will be made.
You want to give us the budget of it?
No.
We got it within $1 million from unidentified sources. They said it was around 20.
They're wrong. I just tell you, and again, just so you know, there are maybe 3 people in this room that actually do, because to us, they are not, and I'm not defensive about it, we never talk about the budgets of our movies. You know, we've been consistent about that for years, and it's not just animation in it, but I think that we do, it's almost immeasurable in this, because, there's a studio over here, which I hope you all have visited, that we do animation in, and so you tell me how much of that building should be charged to a movie that we're doing work in, and how much of it is show for the parks, and I could sort of take that through everything. So there's almost no number that anybody could throw at you that frankly is relevant to what it really. Well, the only thing I will tell you about it is it did not cost any more or less than Oliver.
Are you going to phase out the Glendale and the Burbank studios and make this home base, or will you always work between the two states?
No. We need both places, and in fact, we had a meeting this morning before coming here with all the principal people down here about how to get this facility now to grow to the next level of output, and about how to add on here additional space and buildings and personnel. And no, we need it on both coasts. As I said to you, we're all over the world. We should get all over the country here. So no, I think right now we want to expand the facility here, and not to complement Los Angeles, not replace it.
So you have places all over the world. How much time do you actually spend in those places? You guys yourself?
I don't know, not that much. Most of it comes to me. Most of the work, when it's ready, will make its way over to me through other executives. I don't do it all, by the way. There are, dozens and dozens of brilliantly creative, executives and talents, and a guy by the name of Gary Kreisel, who runs our television animation company, and Peter Schneider, who's somewhere here, who runs the feature animation company, and so it ain't all me by even a remote stretch. We've assembled.
You're the last word, surely.
Well, okay, but maybe. But I'm just saying to you, there are a lot of talented people.
Yeah.
Do you have a release for Roller Coaster Rabbit?
Yes, it's coming out on Dick Tracy next summer.
Dick Tracy.
June 15th.
Thank
you very much.
Nice to meet you. What was that?
June 15th.
Roller Coaster Rabbit.
Okay. So this is interesting. Somebody asked Katzenberg whether they might close down the animation studio in Burbank and make Orlando their home base. It's actually kind of funny because in 2004, the opposite happened. They closed the Orlando studio and made Burbank the home base. So it's kind of a weird question. Somebody was seeing the future in opposite world.
The opposite world.
Yes. Yeah. Let's see, another thing. Katzenberg talked about an upcoming movie that they were working on called An Arabian Night. Obviously, that title later changed to Aladdin. And he also mentioned that they were developing Swan Lake.
Right.
And that didn't happen. There is no Disney animated film of Swan Lake, at least as of the time that we're recording this. Maybe it will exist later. But yeah, they were working on it and it didn't happen, which is interesting because he sounded really high on it in this interview. But they scrapped it. And I scoured the internet trying to see if anybody knows why, and nobody knows for certain, but I did find some speculation that it was too similar to The Little Mermaid because it involved a heroine being turned into a human.
Oh.
So that makes sense. I mean, if the storylines were a little too similar, I can get why they dropped it. And then Katzenberg started to name the third film that they had in development, and that's when we were cut off by the cassette ending, and there's a beep. So the little 10-second gap, we missed the name of the third film that was in development, but we hear him say the phrase "out in the jungle." So I think it's a pretty safe bet he was talking about The Lion King, which at the time was called King of the Jungle.
Very cool. Very cool.
So that's all I've got for Katzenberg. You got anything?
Compared to what you just put, I've got nothing on Katzenberg. Got nothing. Just the whole stress thing. I go back to these interviews and I love listening to all the little nuggets of advice that they give. So
sure,
because I need them. I need the advice.
Do you?
I need a little bit of insight.
Okay.
Yeah, a little bit. But I gained and gleaned a lot from Roy E. Disney, though. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, for example?
For example, I'll tell you right now.
Please.
Putting me on the spot. When I was a kid, I used to love The Black Cauldron.
Did you?
Yes.
So you're the one.
I'm the one. I saw it in the theater with my late uncle and my aunt, and I had a great time with them. I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't live up to my expectations. I still liked it, but
yeah, I read the books as a kid, and I think that might be why I didn't like the movie, because they deviated too much.
Right. I was surprised when Roy E. Disney said that was at the time his least favorite Disney movie.
Right.
He just went out and just said it during the interview.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't disagree, but as we've said on this show before, it's interesting when these people are willing to say something like that in front of the microphones and to go on record with it.
I love the whole quotable stuff whenever we do these interviews, and things that I take away is, and this is not a spoiler, when someone asked him about the whole idea about living up to the Disney name, and this is one of the things that I take away no matter where you are in your life. He just says, well, just be glad you have a name to live up to. And I thought that was really cool that he just bluntly said that. It's good to follow in someone, a great person's footsteps, if that's your father or mother.
Or uncle, as the case may be. Roy, of course, was the nephew of the great Walt Disney. He spent pretty much his whole life working at the Walt Disney Company. He was vice chairman for a number of years and head of the animation department. He was a huge advocate for hand-drawn animation, and there were a couple of times where he felt so strongly about the company going off track that he resigned his position from the board of directors to work outside the system to right the ship. So he was a big hero in the animation world. Sadly, he died from stomach cancer on December 16th, 2009. 3 weeks shy of his 80th birthday, but definitely a legend. So before we get started on Roy, I do want to point out, towards the end of this interview, Roy starts talking about tummy trouble and Roller Coaster Rabbit, but he doesn't really say what those things are, so I wanted to give you some context that these were short films starring Roger Rabbit that ran at movie theaters. Tummy Trouble was attached to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and Roller Coaster Rabbit ran with Dick Tracy. And then later there was a third called Trail Mix-Up, which ran with A Far Off Place.
I think A Far Off Place starred Reese Witherspoon for some reason.
You are correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So here's Roy Disney.
This is Roy Disney, Vice Chairman of the Walt Disney Company and Head of Animation.
Hi.
Dick Tracy, okay.
Fine.
Sick of talking yet?
No, not yet, really. Not about this movie.
After this
This is the best table.
What's the
All right.
status of Fantasia? Where is that?
You mean the new one or the old one?
The old one. Where?
Well, next year, 1990, is its 50th anniversary, and we are actually in the process of doing a big renovation of both the original negative and the soundtracks for that.
Will you do a big campaign like you did for Snow White?
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
Now, the Fantasia was, they took things out for the new soundtrack, is that right? They took
We are going back to the old original tracks.
And restore them?
Yeah. The trick is to try to bring the quality up to the level of modern recordings. Because of course, they were all on old optical tracks, and the frequency ranges were fairly narrow. So you're doing a certain amount of you digitize it, and then you start twiddling with things and trying to get the higher frequency responses back into that track that weren't really ever recorded.
You had mentioned, I think last year when we did Oliver, that Fantasia was always supposed to be a work in progress. That was Walt's original vision. And it's funny, just on the bus we were all talking about, God, we hope that they don't lose the original one.
No. We won't. In fact, about when was it? In the 60s sometime, they went back and re-recorded all the music with Irwin Kostal on digital tracks. And they somehow lost all the kind of life that the Stokowski version had, and we've kind of given up on those tracks, and that's why we're going back rejuvenating the originals and adding Deems Taylor back in. They'd cut all of that out in that release as well, and so we're quite literally going back to the original film.
Where does Mermaid stand? If anybody has a perspective on the history of Disney animation, it sure as hell better be you. We're trying to figure. I'm trying to place Little Mermaid in some sort of historical perspective. Obviously, it's the newest one, but where does it stand? From my perspective, this could be the most important Disney animated feature, maybe since Cinderella.
Well, certainly since Sleeping Beauty, in another sense. Although I never felt real strong vibes about that movie. It was in the technical sense, probably the best thing we ever did. But in the story sense, it wasn't as strong as some of them. I would go back to Cinderella and Peter Pan, certainly, if not clear back to Pinocchio and Snow White.
What makes it go back besides the obvious fairy tale element to those things?
I think there's a kind of a quality to it, partly in the animation and the craft, and partly in the kind of a story it is. It is a classic fairy tale, which has all of those kind of timeless reverberations to it. I could see this 50 years from now and it'd still work. That the classics have had. You kind of get a little uncomfortable talking that way because, if 10 years from now I'll tell you whether this is a classic or not, and I'd really, as much as you'd like to think you're making one, and as much as you say to yourself in the process, hey, I just want to make a really good film here, and let somebody else tell me it's a classic. There's a lot of things pulling in different directions at you that way.
Well, we'll tell you that.
Okay, I'm delighted to have anybody else tell me.
Fine, we will. And I guess we're just trying to come up with some way to substantiate that, and it seems to be more than the fairy tale element. I don't know if you guys agree. Technically.
Well, yeah, I think the quality of the work is there. I think the backgrounds we paid more attention. The music certainly has a lot to do with it too. We'd kind of, for reasons that I was never clear on, got away from real good music in animation for a long time. And there are tunes in there, God bless you, Howard and Alan, that you're going to remember for a long, long time, and they're going to have those same reverberations that When You Wish Upon a Star does, I hope. I mean, again, it's 10 years from now, you'll know that better than you know it now. But
I do a 60s show, and I was wondering, since the 60s, how has Disney, maybe animation changed? Not necessarily just technically, just in your eyes, considering your leading source of this.
Well, it really, I don't think has changed a whit. We are still doing exactly what they did in the 30s in terms of the craft of it. I mean, you look at all this stuff on the wall here that could have been drawn in the 30s. Some of the technical aspects of how we get it from that stage onto film are now beginning to change pretty radically through the computer. But the animator's work itself, in terms of the character, is exactly what we've always done. In the same way we've always done it.
Obviously, you're a fan of Disney, I would hope.
Needless to say.
What's the best part about being a Disney?
The best quote I ever got was one of my kids one time was going through this thing in school of, oh God, I'm getting kidded about it and all this kind of thing, and I wish I'd been named Smith or something. And his teacher said to him, just be glad you've got a name to live up to and not a name to live down. And I've used that quote many, many times since because I think it's about as good an answer as there is to that.
What's the worst part about being a Disney?
Oh, once in a while, you can't get away from it,
Were you an animator yourself?
No, I was not blessed with that gift.
Was your dad?
No, Dad was. But Dad probably drew worse than I do, which is really dreadful. Walt really, in truth, was not a great artist by any means.
He was a sketch artist, cartoonist kind of guy.
More like that, yeah. But he was blessed with the talent of knowing talent when he saw it. And I think that was maybe the thing he had going for him most of all was the ability to recognize quality.
He also would, I'm told, act out scenes in front of his animators.
Yeah. Once in a while, you'd jump up and say, well, what if it looked like this or something? We all do that, I think, to a certain extent. Your friend Jeffrey over there has adopted that. He's getting pretty good at it, too, I must say.
Yeah. Did he do anything on this film?
I remember him swimming around the room as Ariel one time.
Mr. Katzenberg.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, I realize.
Can you talk to us a little bit about Disney's getting back up to speed, actually even faster, even a faster speed than in the, quote, good old days?
Really about equal right now. If you go back to Snow White, Pinocchio, Bambi, Fantasia, Dumbo, that's about a 5-year period. So this is what we're trying to do now.
But this isn't fast. I mean, this was
Well, 4 years. Little Mermaid's been in production for about 4 years. So we've got giant overlaps going on between phases of production all the time. We have really about 4 shows going at any given time. Because it is basically a 4-year process.
I was thinking, some of the animators said they were working on,
In terms of building the empire, though, I mean, you've got all that increased staff out in Glendale, like 400 people or so, right? And as I understand it, you're increasing the number of people in Florida building satellites.
Well, we don't have really much room to do it, to increase that staff down here right now. We were just talking this morning that we may want to think along those lines, though.
I was interested in one of the animators said that he was going to be working on the Rescuers a little bit from here. So is that a change of mission?
There was not really. There was some mermaid work done down here, sort of towards the end when it got to be crunch time, which it always does at the end of one of these things.
More than ink and paint?
There was some animation done down here, and they also did some. There's some McDonald's commercials that'll either be out soon or they already are. I'm not sure that were done down here.
But some actual animation for the film itself.
Yeah. Although I think most of the work was ink and paint.
You were telling us before that your least favorite Disney movie was Sleeping Beauty. Do you have a favorite one?
Oh, I didn't mean no. My least favorite was the Black Cauldron. That's really easy. But
why was that?
Because it was such a dark, gloomy, depressing non-story. Which was its biggest fault. The story was pretty obscure.
So the original Hans Christian Andersen version of this is pretty dark.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
The writers had just guessed that perhaps that was one of the reasons why Walt himself said maybe let's not do this. I guess he was intrigued by the story.
Yeah,
started to work on it.
Although the first I ever heard that they'd even thought about it was this morning, looking through some notes before I came down here. Apparently John Musker saw something on it, though I haven't caught up with John to even ask him about it yet. It wouldn't surprise me that they looked at it, though, because they were looking at a lot of fairy tales. I know Beauty and the Beast, which we are now getting fairly close to having a pretty good handle on, was another one that Walt wasn't sure how to do and sort of passed by several times, I gather.
So one can only guess.
You look at everything. If we have 25 stories in development right now, and we'll probably make out of that 25 3 or 4, we've probably looked at another couple of hundred, in little one-liner kind of ways, and just said, well, no, that just doesn't sound right. It may be that someday, 10 years from now, somebody will bring the same thing back, and you'll say, hey, that sounds kind of interesting, and it's a mood thing sometimes with you.
Is making a film underwater more difficult? It takes more.
There was a whole new set of rules about gravity that had to be learned by everybody. They did a lot of studies on Ariel's hair, for instance, and how it moves, and sort of as counterpoint to the character's movement, and the hair goes the other way when she moves, and that sort of thing. So we had a big fish tank out in the lobby and still there, actually. And every now and then you go out and find 5 guys sitting in front staring at the fishes,
What sort of role did Roger Rabbit have where do you think that falls in the history of Disney animation? Obviously, it was just such an enormous. Well, it must have propelled the enthusiasm of the animation.
I think the single most important thing it did was to say to a lot of people that animation can be fun again. Because we went through a period of not such great films. And in addition to which, there's this explosion of Saturday morning El Cheapo kind of animation that a lot of people began to say, oh, animation, and Disney, oh, sticky sweet. And I think Roger and Oliver really too, to a certain extent, because Oliver was kind of a hip little story, said to people, hey, it's fun, it's okay to like it. And I would give Roger a great lot of the credit for that. It was, technically a hell of a breakthrough too, because that business of combining the elements is difficult at best, and technically in the old days, you'd lose so much quality by the act of rephotographing frames that it looked like what it was.
One of the things that seems to be an earmark of The Little Mermaid is the depth of the human characters. And it's one of the criticisms of Disney's films from the very beginning is that humans are boring. Well, these guys aren't so boring. And I'm wondering if you feel that that's perhaps...
We worked awful hard, particularly with Ariel, that way. And give Jodie a lot of credit for that, because she added so much life to it. But with the notion was that this could not one more time just be another stick figure. Eric is unfortunately still a bit of a stick figure, but although I think he's better than Prince Charming.
Oh,
I mean, woo.
Yeah, a whole lot.
Do you think, quickly, the future of shorts is as bright as those for features?
I don't think ever in the quantity that we used to make. I mean, we used to make 20 a year, back in the 30s, but one or two a year. I think there's a market for them. Certainly there was for tummy trouble.
I mean, we started testing the market here with the roller coaster rabbit.
Well, tummy trouble kind of gave us the clue. It worked. You can argue forever about how much it may or may not have contributed to Honey's success, but it certainly didn't hurt it a bit. And it's a wonderful outlet for story people, because they can do things with Roger that you can't do with Ariel, say. You can smash him against walls and bug his eyes out and drop his chin to the floor and all these wonderful things, and it's a great kind of freedom in storytelling.
But one or two a year, and you would include, like, The Prince and the Pauper as well as a short?
Probably I'd include that in the same kind of a category, yeah. But done with a real high quality of animation.
And still, mainly, that's all that's going to be done out of Florida?
As of now, yeah. Although it works down here. We have now found that out after 6 months, and so you begin to say, well, maybe we should be doing more down here. But that's just talk at this point.
Several years down the road.
Right.
Thank you very
my
much.
master call.
Bye. Thank you.
So that was Roy E. Disney.
It was. Wanted to point out right at the end, this junket was recorded in Orlando, so they were down at the Florida studio, which at the time was flourishing. They were doing a lot of animation down there. It's since been shut down. But before it was shut down, they made a few movies. They made Mulan down there. They made Lilo and Stitch and Brother Bear.
Oh.
But as soon as Disney decided they didn't want to do hand-drawn animation anymore, they cut the Florida studio loose, which was very heartbreaking for a lot of us animation fans, and certainly for the people who worked there.
Yeah.
So it was a tough time.
I think a little memory I just remembered. I worked at the Daily Bruin, and a friend of mine, Aaron, he was a film columnist, film writer there, and I think he was one of the people flown, did the college tour, went to Orlando, and he always said had great memories of, this is back in the day, and this is something we're going to talk about in future episodes, but out-of-town trips was a big part of what we did in the 90s. It's a little tease.
Yeah, the Florida studio, Disney's Florida Animation Studio, used to be a part of the Disney MGM Studios, which I think is now just called the Disney Animation Studios, or something like that. But back in the day, when it was Disney MGM, they would have an attraction where you would walk through areas where they were actually working, and you would be up above, and it was soundproof, so you wouldn't disturb them. But you could look down and see them at their desks making these films.
Wow.
And it was pretty memorable for those of us who got to go to Florida and do that.
I never did.
Yeah, I'm sorry it still doesn't exist. Very sad.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're coming up now to our last interview of this show, our last interview of part 1 of The Little Mermaid. There will be more on our next episode. For now, we're going to wrap things up with 15 minutes with Jodie Benson, who was the voice of Ariel, the star, the Little Mermaid herself.
Here we go.
This is the last
and best.
And the best table? We saved the best for last. Let's have some serious microphone action here. Oh, baby.
Carroll, isn't it?
I love her. I love her. She's great. These are neat. Okay.
No.
Ross, is this your
you
water?
have any idea? No, you can have it. I don't know if you have any idea how much credit they give you.
Sorry.
Everyone that's come to our table has mentioned you in a very, in a way that indicates that you helped them immeasurably just being yourself. I mean, you know, you can't be anything other than just putting yourself out there. But they really, yeah, thank you. My girlfriend does that.
I like it. Neat.
But anyway, it's
well, that's
kind of
nice. Thank you, everybody.
Have you ever felt that you've contributed so much in any other way, any of your other work?
No, because this has been a one-on-one kind of creative development sort of project from day one, and I love to do stuff like that. And because I've only been involved in theater, I've never done anything like this, so I just kind of did what I like to do. And I just, when I went in for the voice, it was strange. At the audition, I said, how old is she? And they said 14 to 16. I said, fine. So I just did what I thought would be that voice, and it's never changed. They just kept it that way. And in listening to the tapes, I guess they just heard something. I don't know. They just heard something within it that they said, that's what we want to use. And as far as the development goes, when we sat down, we read through it, and I met everybody. And then I realized that they ran a videotape the whole time that I was in the recording studio. I thought it was for the archives for Disney. I didn't realize it was for reference. So when I saw the film for the first time last week, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. I said, my God, her upper body and facial movements look so much like me. It's really frightening. And then I called Glenn and I said, you used that tape, didn't you? And he said, yes, I did. Because I know Sherry Lynn did the Underwater. I was on the road with a show and I wasn't able to go out and do it. And so, I mean, I thought, well, you know, I'll just do the voice, and that's great. I'm thrilled about that. But I didn't realize her personality and the way that she looks has transformed so much to start taking on a personality. It's just neat. It's really neat to see that.
What were you doing on the road?
Well, I was doing a whole bunch of things. I was doing like live industrial shows here and there, and I did a tour like of West Side Story. And then I was doing this last Broadway show I did. I was telling everybody I've got a credit of 3 Broadway flops, but this last one was Welcome to the Club, which was Cy Coleman's show. Bless its heart, it should have rest its soul there. After a week, it was really painful to do, but so I wasn't able to get out at a whim for some of the stuff, but they were able to use that reference tape. So it is neat to see the development, and you know, Glenn's and John and Ron and the directors and everybody, it was a real collaboration. You know, they were real helpful. Well, it was kind of challenging, but like I said, because I've never done voiceover work, all I was handed was a script and a couple of sketch-type things similar to those up there on the wall, but by all these different animators, because they just had to get them out there. So they weren't Glenn's drawings, so there were about 25 versions of what Ariel looked like, and that was it. And as an actress, I just figured, well, I'm going to make a buffoon of myself, so I might as well do it now with my friends, and they got a heyday. They loved to laugh behind the glass at me on a daily basis. But I just acted like a mermaid. And I just acted everything out because that was about the best way that I could think to get what they needed.
So you never really talked with the animators after that?
Yes. Oh, I talked to Glenn throughout the whole process. Yeah. And I know that he was basically the head animator for my character. And I watched her develop, and as he studied the tapes, then we would find out. He'd say, yeah, I really like this type of mannerism, or, you know, biting your lip, or putting your hand here, or in the song. The song is really neat to watch, because that's kind of the closest of what we did when I was in the studio.
When you would call you, what would he be interested in knowing? I mean, you did a lot of work on the phone, I guess.
Well, He really just used from the reference tape, because when he first came in, they didn't tell me. I'm glad they didn't tell me about the tape, because I probably wouldn't have done some of the crazy things that I did. And basically, he just took everything off of the tape. We talked about this song, and we both wanted to keep it very simple. Sitting on a stone in the dark, more of a monologue, which just extended into a song. But Disney, the rest of the staff didn't agree with the two of us. We didn't have much say. And so it ended up being very animated. There's a lot of action going on in it. And the reason why is because for an audience member to watch a screen stay very still for 3.5 minutes is trying, especially for children. So you need to have it. And also, the way the animation worked, it supported the lyrics of the song. And most people don't really listen to lyrics. They listen to melodies, but they don't listen to the words of the song and say, oh, she's talking about wanting to become a human. So they have to reenact it with her dancing and her playing in the sand and her strutting up the street and that kind of thing. So then we understood why, but Glenn and I still had a favorite feeling that we kind of wished we could have kept it a little bit.
Did your mother or teachers ever say to you, just calm down, stop being so extrovert?
Yeah, my mom said that to me on the phone yesterday, as a matter of fact.
And that's just what got you the role in it.
Yeah.
It has put you now into the archives of historical.
That's wild, isn't it?
I mean, from now on, your children, grandchildren will always say, God,
that's really neat.
Looks just like.
I guess when I took the job because I felt like it was something really wonderful to be a part of. That was it. I didn't even think in terms of, because I'm so used to Broadway where a critic can close a show in one night, somebody like Frank Rich. And so I just thought in terms of, well, we'll just wait and see what the critics say about the show. And if they like it, then we'll deal with all that stuff. Well, I didn't realize that Disney is not affected as much by critics as a Broadway show is. So now I'm starting to think, now the reality of the situation is hitting in. But it's been a 3-year process, and I think that I haven't said, okay, it's now really, really happening. So I haven't thought in those terms until this weekend, now that it's really here and meeting people like you guys that have seen the film and
you'll
know
find
about
people
it.
have a lot of respect for Disney's.
Not always, though. And in this particular case, you're involved. You're involved in what's like pretty
classic.
In its new phase,
Classics are something you can't really lose with, I think. Well, you probably could, but I think that...
well, we're not going to be so quick about calling it a classic. It's just that it is a good film.
Yeah, well, the Fable. Being Hans Christian Andersen, being as around as much as it has, and with kids having been familiarized with it, I think it really works out well.
What about the music? We do music shows. Your musical influences growing up, singing. Were you what type of kid always singing around the house?
Yeah, I had a kind of a Janis Joplin stage. I grew up in... I'm 28, so I was born in 61. I played guitar, 12-string folk guitar, and so every day after school I would go and sit in my room and play a guitar and just sing songs for about 4 hours and not do my homework and try and then get ready for dinner. So I sing a lot by myself. I entertain myself a lot. My mother calls me Sarah Bernhardt, but when you're the baby of the family, you got to do a lot of stuff to get people's attention. So I think growing up that I always kind of figured I'd be an actress, and so I can really relate to this character a lot. The fighting of tying the string, ripping off that cord with the parents, and being very rebellious. So.
Is there a song from that time period, maybe it's late 60s, that brings you right back to your memory?
Well, Carroll King was somebody that I think So Far Away was one of my favorite songs in Tapestry.
When you hear that, where do you go to? You can feel being back in your room again.
Well, So Far Away was a tune that I used. I had gotten interviewed last week about that, and So Far Away was a song that I used in reference to Part of Your World, because it's something that whenever you can make a recall about something where you spend some time, and a song that you used to work on, stuff like that. So I think that would probably be it.
Have you seen her act?
The new one? No, she was in New York, and I didn't get to see the new one.
Stage now.
She's still as stunningly beautiful as she was back then, too.
So much
She's a gorgeous woman.
She's just put herself together. She's got great musicians, and she does her concerts. This newest one is fabulous.
She was just in New York last month, and I was on the road. I didn't get to see it.
Little Mermaid. Tell us about how much you knew about voice actors working with Disney animators. Do you know much about the history?
No.
You don't know much at all?
No.
So you don't know whether what you did was different than, say,
No.
you did 20 years ago?
Absolutely not. Except from reference of watching films growing up. Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Pinocchio, I think were the four that I really hooked into. But it's interesting because when I got the job, I probably should have. Most people would think, well, why didn't you watch Splash? Okay, why didn't you rent all of the Disney? And I didn't want to because I'm easily influenced by things that I see and the sights and the sounds, and I didn't want to stray away from what I had given them at the audition because I was afraid I was going to lose it. By the time I got to the recording studio, 4 months had passed, and I didn't remember what I did at the audition, so I asked for a reference tape to try to match it. And then over the 3 years, when you do ADR looping, you have to do your homework to match back up because it's kind of hard to match a voice, especially singing. It's hard to match up if your voice changes as you get older, or the weather. What the weather was like that day in LA could have affected whether I had a cold like I do right now. Then I'd really luck out and they'd have to work around the schedule of my voice. But
it seems as if this particular film has a real sort of New York flavor to it.
Do you think so?
A real Broadway flavor.
Oh, it does. Good.
And again, one of the things that they told us was that they auditioned jillions of people in LA couldn't get it. What do you think is the benefit about being a New Yorker? What do you think? Do you think that had anything to do with you getting the role?
I think having done Broadway musicals probably helped to be able to extend from the vocal dialogue into the vocal song. I think that blend of those two things really helped. Obviously, it incorporated into this film quite beautifully with Sam Wright, who I worked with before, and with Pat, and I think that was definitely a pro in helping the film. As far as a New Yorker, I guess I don't consider myself a New Yorker, being from Illinois and not really like to live. I don't like to live in New York City, but it's kind of where my work is based right now. Yeah, I do understand that they did audition quite a few people, and like I said, they didn't direct me when I was at the audition. They didn't say, give us this, give us that. I just kind of went in and did what I normally sang. So it was one of those things where it's a 1 in a million chance where they say, that's the sound that we're looking for. I don't know how they do it. I'd be fascinated to find out how they analyze a voice to describe a personality, because my picture wasn't there. I wasn't on tape. You know, how they must hear something. That's quite a keen gift, I think, if you could hear a personality through a voice. So it's been great. It's been the best experience. The Disney people are amazing to work with. From top to bottom, it's been an amazing 3 years. They're
You were brought in 3
such
years
great
ago?
people. Yeah, my first audition was almost 3 years ago, and they'll tell you this is the quickest record for them. Usually an animated feature film takes 5 years. So you get totally detached because you do your work a long time ago, and then you come, and now it's happening, and you see it all put together, and you forget. I forgot what I did in the studio, so it was like a new experience.
So you know, like 30 years from now, you could get trotted out for the 30th anniversary.
Yeah, and then
Snow White.
Yeah, wouldn't that be well? And someone said, yeah, but where are those voices now? And I thought, oh God, that's right. Do you mean like your career goes downhill once you do it?
The lady who did Snow White sang for
She
us.
comes out every couple of years.
Ron and John played a trick. They ran my tape at high speed, like double the time. They said, you sound just like Snow White. And I went, oh,
Have
good.
they seen you in anything?
Without it.
Any of your
That was the
musicals?
classic sound back then.
Have they seen you in any of your
No,
musicals?
I don't think so.
You just came in cold. Your agent got you the audition?
Now, Howard and I did Smile together, and he was at my audition, but he promises that he had nothing to do with it. And I said, now come on, be honest. He said, no, Jody, really. Once the taping, and I sent the tape to LA, I had no say in the matter. He goes, I found out when you found out that you got it. So we were happy about that.
This is the sort of job that could get you a lot of other jobs, and maybe you have no longer big flops in the future. I mean, what are you doing now?
Well, right now I'm on tour. I was on tour last month and this month, so I'm booked out with this. I go on press tour. So I'm booked out until the 26th, I think, of November. So I auditioned for stuff right before this, so I'm kind of waiting to hear about some stuff, possibly out in LA or here.
Because the voice is impressive as hell. I mean, it's,
thank you.
There and you're like,
Thanks.
wow, and it is a killer song too.
Thank you.
Can you
It
do
is a great
Phantom?
song.
Could you do the Sarah Brightman role in Phantom?
Did you just hear me say that? That's what I'm waiting to hear about in LA.
No,
yeah.
I just figure
How
from
funny.
the
You
sound
read
of your
minds.
voice. The sound of your
Yes,
voice.
I had my final callback for Hal Prince last week,
Good.
so I'm
They're
waiting to hear
putting
about
two
that.
more productions.
Chicago, which is my home area in Illinois, so I'm waiting to hear about that. Rockford. outside of Chicago. It's a very tiny little place.
How long have you lived in New York?
I've lived in New York for 5 years. No, I've been married for 5 years, but we don't have any kids yet. He's an actor. Does Broadway shows. So to answer your question, I'm not really doing anything except going on tour now and waiting to hear about that.
You'll be busy.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because I didn't think in terms of ever getting work from this, because I thought, you know, what kind of work can you get from this? Voiceover work, which would be great, and other animated features, which would be great. But actually, it does, because of her personality, and a lot of that's attributed to Glenn, that it has opened up doors, and it's exciting. So you guys must be tired. You're probably ready to get up out of these chairs, aren't you?
My tape recorder wasn't working, so I have a little cramp here. But
How long did you actually spend in the studio recording?
About 12 days.
Whoa!
How long ago was that?
I started about, oh my God, when is that from?
Ages. I just did a half of
That's from last year.
All right, so that was Jodie Benson. It did cut off at the end, but she was done anyway.
One of the cool things is her love, from the interviews, her love of Janis Joplin as a youth, and the fact that the idea that this was her first time doing voice work, and she just essentially knocks it out of the park.
Oh, no question.
That's amazing.
Yep. So that wraps it up for this episode, but as we've mentioned before, this is a part 1 of 2, so we still have a lot more Little Mermaid to go, and I just want to give you guys a preview of what's in our next episode. We've got 4 legendary Disney animators, Glenn Keane, David Stephan, Andreas Deja, and Mark Henn. And then following that, we have 2 interviews from the film's re-release in 1997. These are longer interviews. One of them is Buddy Hackett, and then the other is a second interview with Jodie Benson, which I find really interesting because when you compare these 2 interviews, you've got Jodie before the film opens, and then you've got Jodie, what is that, 7 years later, 8 years later?
8 years later.
And her perspective has completely changed because now she's become this iconic Disney princess. So what we just heard was her not even knowing if the film is going to be a hit. And in part 2, when we hear from her again, she's on the other end of the rainbow.
Yeah.
She is Ariel, and it's a part of who she is now, and her perspective is completely different. So it's really interesting to compare the 2 perspectives from the same person.
I just can't wait till we get to the Buddy Hackett interview where the chemistry between him and you, Matt Levitz, is quite amazing. I'm not even going to say anything about that. You're going to have to really talk about that for the next part 2.
I don't know whether chemistry is the right word.
That is the right word. I'm going to stick with chemistry.
So anyway, we did want to remind you guys that we have a webpage, which is mattandgregpodcast.com, and also a Facebook page at facebook.com/mattandgreg. And
please give us your insights, comments, everything. We're just starting off the show. We're learning as we go, and the content is good, and hopefully we are too, but we'd love to hear some straight talk from you guys.
Please. So that's it. Signing off now. This is Matt Levitz.
And this is Greg Srzavosty, the absolute no star of the show. We will see you. You're the star, Matt. Remember this. No, we're not the stars. The content, the interviews are the stars.
Yeah. We're a couple of nobodies that we don't even know why you're listening to us. If I were you guys, I would skip right past our stuff.
Thank you, and we will talk to you guys next episode.
We now return you to your regularly scheduled lives.